I only needed shelter, but this cottage already knew my family's name.
No family willing to keep her, no room promised beyond morning, no plan she could name. Just a canvas suitcase and $186.73 she had saved from washing cafeteria trays after school. And with that, $186.73, she bought a condemned timber cottage hidden above Granville Notch in Addison County, Vermont, a settlement that had fallen off county road maps in 1948. The north roof had opened beneath a fallen limb. 3 windows had no glass and the well pump was frozen. The county had condemned the building since 1971 and scheduled its demolition for the following spring. But what nobody knew was that behind a fitted cedar panel beneath the cottage stairs, in a sealed compartment unopened for 83 years, was something that would change her life forever. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Rebecca Hayes had been leaving her whole life without knowing it. Her first departure came before memory could keep a record of it. She was 4 months old when her mother carried her away from a second-floor apartment in Rutland during a wet March morning, leaving behind a crib borrowed from a church basement and 2 bottles cooling in a saucepan. There had been no ceremony. The landlord had changed the lock before noon. After that came a succession of rooms whose ceilings she remembered more clearly than the people who owned them. There was a yellowed ceiling above a fold-out couch in Fairhaven, where a water stain resembled a sleeping fox. There was the slanted attic in Middlebury where snow sifted through a nail hole and melted on the wool blanket at her feet. There was a narrow room beside a laundromat in Brandon, where the dryers turned until midnight and the walls trembled with their patient revolving. Her mother, Elaine, called each move temporary. Rebecca learned that temporary could last years. She learned to pack without folding everything. She kept her socks inside her shoes, her school papers between the pages of a road atlas, and her toothbrush wrapped in a washcloth near the top of whatever bag they were using. She never fastened the final buckle until the car was running. At school, she wrote addresses lightly, because erasers left less evidence than crossed-out ink. Teachers sent permission slips home in sealed envelopes, and Rebecca returned them with signatures that leaned differently from month to month. She seldom invited anyone inside. When classmates asked where she lived, she named the nearest road rather than the building. Elaine was not careless in the obvious ways. She remembered birthdays, though sometimes 3 days late. She warmed canned peaches in winter and sprinkled them with cinnamon because Rebecca had once said they tasted better that way. When money permitted, she bought library sale books and wrote Rebecca's name carefully inside the cover. Yet Elaine's tenderness was like a porch lamp in bad weather. It shone, but it did not keep the roof from lifting. There had been men before Dale Mercer, though none stayed long enough for Rebecca to learn the rhythm of their footsteps. Dale stayed. That was what made him different. Before him, the nearest thing Rebecca had to a father was a man named Samuel Hayes, her mother's uncle, who lived alone in a cedar-sided house outside Bristol. He had hands broadened by work and a silver half-moon scar beneath his left thumb. His hair had gone white early, but his eyebrows remained dark and severe, giving strangers the impression that he disapproved of them. He rarely did. Samuel repaired locks. Not the bright packaged cylinders sold in hardware stores, but mortise locks from meeting houses, school cupboards, railway trunks, farmhouse doors, and forgotten desks whose keys had disappeared with the people who once carried them. He could cut a bit key by hand, file a ward from brass, straighten a bent escutcheon, and listen to a lock as another person might listen to rain. His workshop stood behind the house in a converted carriage shed. On Saturdays, Rebecca sat at the long maple bench while he worked beneath a green-shaded lamp. The room smelled of iron filings, beeswax lamp oil, and the coffee he allowed to grow cold beside his elbow. Their ritual never varied. At 8 in the morning, Samuel swept the bench with a horsehair brush. Rebecca sorted loose screws into shallow tobacco tins according to thread and length. At 9, he boiled water on a hot plate and made cocoa for her in a chipped blue mug. Then he chose one object from the week's repairs and explained not merely how it worked, but why someone had once believed it worth making well. A lock from an 1840 farmhouse had handmade springs, each one darkened and tempered over charcoal. A post office box door from New Haven Junction carried scratches beside the keyway, left by a clerk who had opened it every morning for 37 years. A brass padlock from a maple sugaring shed bore 3 initials cut so lightly they appeared only when tilted toward the lamp. Samuel never hurried the telling. He let Rebecca hold each piece. He showed her how to feel for burrs along the metal with the pad of her thumb, how to tell wrought iron from mild steel by its grain, and how to place dismantled parts in the exact order of removal. When she lost a spring beneath the bench, he did not scold her. He lowered himself onto one knee and searched with her until they found it caught in a curl of gray dust. At noon, they ate egg sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. Samuel sliced one apple between them with a folding knife, then set the seeds along the window ledge for no reason Rebecca understood. Some weekends he spoke only a few dozen words. The silence was never empty. In the afternoon, he allowed her to practice. Her first keys were crude blanks made from soft brass. She filed too deeply, corrected too late, and once snapped a narrow tooth from the bit. Samuel kept the broken piece in a glass jar with other failures. He said mistakes deserved an orderly place because disorder made people repeat them. When she was 12, he gave her a narrow warding file with a walnut handle worn smooth by another hand. When she was 14, he let her take apart a lock from a boarded schoolhouse. At 16, she cut a working key without assistance, testing it against soot-blackened marks until the bolt traveled cleanly. Samuel turned the key once, then again. A key is only a promise made exact. Those were the words Rebecca remembered. He meant that hope without workmanship could fail at the moment it was most needed. A door did not open because someone wished for shelter. It opened because another person had measured carefully, filed patiently, and left a way through. Samuel never told her where he had learned that belief. He died in late October, 9 days after Rebecca turned 17. The morning had been clear enough for frost to remain on the shaded side of the stone walls. A neighbor found him seated at the maple bench, one hand resting beside an unfinished brass blank. The green lamp was still burning, though daylight had entered the workshop hours before. There was no wife, no child, and no will anyone could locate. Elaine believed the house would pass to her. Instead, debts emerged in careful envelopes. There were medical accounts, unpaid land taxes, and a private note secured against the property. Within 6 weeks, an estate agent had emptied the rooms and marked the workshop contents for auction. Rebecca reached the carriage shed on the morning of the sale, but the doors had already been chained open. Samuel's vices, files, key gauges, pin trays, and wooden drawers stood in numbered rows beneath the bare rafters. Dealers moved among them with pencils. A man from Albany bought the maple bench. A collector purchased the green lamp and 3 cases of bit keys. The walnut-handled file was gone. So was the glass jar of broken pieces. Rebecca searched every box until an auction worker told her the small tools had been bundled and sold before breakfast. She left carrying only a square of wax paper found beneath a shelf and 1 brass shaving that had caught in a floorboard. She kept both. Dale Mercer arrived in their lives the following February, wearing a camel-colored coat too fine for the apartment stairwell. He sold commercial flooring across 3 states and spoke in the measured voice of someone accustomed to explaining invoices. His shoes remained polished through mud season. His car smelled faintly of leather conditioner and wintergreen. He did not raise his voice. He corrected. He corrected the angle of the kitchen chairs, the amount of detergent used in the washer, the position of Rebecca's boots beside the radiator. He corrected the way Elaine pronounced certain towns and the way Rebecca held a fork. When he moved into the apartment, he replaced the chipped dishes with a matching gray set and discarded the blue cocoa mug because its glaze was cracked. Dale believed every object should justify the space it occupied. Rebecca's belongings occupied too much. Her library books made the sitting room look untidy, her winter coat hung too low on the peg, the canvas suitcase beneath her bed collected dust along the wall. Even Samuel's brass shaving, folded inside wax paper and stored in a matchbox, seemed to offend him once he discovered it. "This is refuse," he said. Rebecca took the matchbox from his palm and returned it to her pocket. After Dale married Elaine, they moved into his ranch house outside Rutland. The building was warm, square, and recently renovated with beige carpet thick enough to erase footsteps. Dale gave Rebecca a room facing the road and asked that she keep the door open unless she was changing clothes. He installed a new lock on the front entrance, an electronic keypad that flashed blue when touched. Rebecca watched him discard the mechanical cylinder and its 2 brass keys into the kitchen wastebasket. She retrieved them after midnight. For 11 months, the house remained orderly. Rebecca finished high school in June and found work washing trays in the hospital cafeteria. She worked the closing shift, taking the last bus home when it ran and walking the remaining 3 miles when it did not. Every Friday, she placed part of her pay in an envelope beneath the suitcase lining. She did not have a destination in mind. Saving was simply another form of keeping a door unlocked. Dale began leaving rental listings on the kitchen table. The first was for a room above a tire shop. The second was a shared apartment near the fairgrounds. The third had a red circle drawn around the monthly price. Elaine moved the papers before supper, then returned them after the dishes were washed. By September, Dale had started referring to Rebecca as an adult whenever money was discussed and as a child whenever she asked for a decision. The eviction came on November 3rd. Freezing rain had polished the driveway and sealed the dead grass beneath a transparent skin. Rebecca returned from the cafeteria shortly after 10, carrying her work shoes and a paper grocery bag because one sole had begun to separate. The porch light was on. Her suitcase stood beneath it. Dale had packed nothing else. Her coat, 2 sweaters, 3 work uniforms, school papers, books, and the road atlas had been pressed inside without care. One buckle was fastened, the other hung open, pinching the sleeve of a blue shirt. On top lay the electronic keypad's discarded brass key. Dale stood behind the storm door. Elaine remained several steps farther back, near the kitchen entrance, holding a dish towel between both hands. Rebecca set down the grocery bag. Ice clicked in the bare lilac branches. Dale opened the storm door only far enough for his voice to pass through. "You cannot keep waiting for us to choose." 8 words. Rebecca looked toward her mother. Elaine tightened the dish towel once, winding the cloth until her knuckles pressed pale beneath the skin. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. She did not step forward. She did not reach for the coat hanging beside the door. She did not ask where Rebecca would sleep. Behind her, the kitchen clock continued its deliberate ticking. Rebecca lifted the suitcase. The damaged buckle gave way, and several books slid onto the wet boards. One fell open against the ice, pages bending beneath its own weight. Elaine lowered her eyes. That was the answer. Rebecca gathered the books, closed the suitcase with both arms around it, and walked down the driveway. She did not look back when the porch light went dark. The first night she slept in the hospital chapel. She knew the building's evening patterns from work. The cleaning staff finished the east corridor near midnight. Security passed the chapel at 12:15 and again shortly before 2. Rebecca sat in the final pew until the fluorescent hall lights dimmed, then lay beneath her coat with the suitcase pressed against her legs. At 4:30, a nurse entered and knelt 3 rows ahead. Rebecca remained still until the woman left. Before dawn, she folded the visitor blanket exactly as she had found it and returned to the cafeteria restroom to wash her face. She spent $3.20 on oatmeal and coffee, though employees were supposed to pay full price after their shifts ended. A cashier named Maribel looked at Rebecca's wet sleeves and rang up only the oatmeal. The second night, she slept in the Rutland bus station, upright on a molded plastic seat beneath a timetable for Burlington. A driver woke her at 5 and told her the building would be washed. He did not ask for a ticket. By the fourth night, she had paid $42 for a room at a motor lodge on Route 7 because the temperature had fallen below 20. She showered twice, washed her uniforms in the sink, and spread them across the heater. She placed the brass key on the bedside table and listened to trucks moving north until morning. The money diminished by exact amounts. A bus to Middlebury cost $8.50. A locker at the station took 4 quarters. A bowl of soup in a church basement required no payment, but Rebecca left 60 cents beneath the paper napkin. 2 nights at a women's shelter cost nothing, though the second night a coughing child slept in the next cot, and Rebecca surrendered her blanket before leaving. In Middlebury, she spent 3 nights in the upper level of a parking garage where warm air rose through the concrete seams. She learned which stairwell door did not latch. She learned that salt trucks began at 3:40 in the morning. She learned to place cardboard beneath the suitcase so melting snow would not soak through the canvas. A librarian found her asleep beside the local history shelves one afternoon. The woman's name was June Patel. She wore copper-framed glasses and carried a pencil behind one ear. She did not ask Rebecca to leave. She brought a cup of hot water from the staff room and placed 3 tea bags beside it, though Rebecca used only one. "You may sit here until closing," June said. Rebecca returned the next morning. For 6 weeks, public buildings became the measured architecture of her days. She entered libraries when their doors opened and left when chairs were turned upside down for cleaning. She read newspapers slowly to remain indoors. She memorized bus routes, restroom codes, closing announcements, and the location of electrical outlets hidden behind planters. She slept twice in an unlocked hay barn south of Vergennes, burrowing between square bales while mice worked somewhere in the walls. She spent one night beneath the covered loading dock of a closed feed store. Another night, after sleet began blowing sideways, she rode the Burlington bus to its final stop and returned without leaving her seat. The round trip consumed $19.40. Her cafeteria job disappeared after 3 missed shifts. The manager left a message at the number Dale had disconnected from her account. By the middle of December, she had $214.18 remaining, including the final paycheck deposited by paper check. By Christmas Eve, after food, transit, 1 pair of dry socks, and a second motel night during a storm, she had $186.73. She counted it at a library table in Middlebury. There were 8 $20 bills, 1 10, 3 5s, a single dollar, and 73 cents. She arranged the coins in a straight line, largest to smallest, then returned them to the envelope beneath the suitcase lining. Outside, snow had begun crossing the windows in long, level threads. June Patel was hanging a handwritten notice beside the copier. The library would close at 3 and remain closed for 2 days. Rebecca watched the tape flatten beneath June's thumb. On the table beside the notice lay a stack of weekly newspapers waiting to be recycled. Rebecca carried one to her seat. She read the employment listings first: home health aide, overnight custodian, dairy relief worker, kitchen assistant. Each required an address, a telephone number, transportation, or experience she did not have. She turned to property notices without intending to. Most were foreclosure announcements written in dense legal language. One offered hunting acreage. Another listed a burned foundation with 7 acres and no road access. Near the bottom of the final column, enclosed within a narrow black border, was an advertisement no larger than a matchbook. County disposal by sealed offer, former Bellweather Wayside Cottage, Granville Notch vicinity, Addison County. Timber dwelling, approximately 18 by 26 feet, with detached privy and failed handwell. Parcel 1.7 acres. Structure condemned. No occupancy approval. No electrical service. Seasonal foot access only. Purchaser accepts all liability, delinquent recording costs, and demolition order effective April 15th. Minimum consideration, $1. Inquiries must be made in person at the county clerk's office before December 28th. Below the notice, someone had printed a reference number and 3 initials. Rebecca read it twice. Then she found Granville Notch in the road atlas. The fold ran through the mountains worn pale from years of opening. State Route 100 curved below the ridge. A thin county road climbed east and ended without explanation among contour lines. Bellweather did not appear. She carried the newspaper to the reference desk and asked June whether old county maps were kept in the building. June led her downstairs. They searched bound atlases from 1936, 1948, and 1962. On the earliest map, the vanished road continued beyond the notch toward a cluster of 5 black squares beside a creek. A name had been printed there in letters so fine that Rebecca needed a magnifying lens. Bellweather Settlement. On the 1948 map, the name was gone. Only the road remained. On the 1962 map, even the road had been shortened. June rested one hand on the edge of the atlas. That country gets deep snow. Rebecca traced the abandoned line without touching the paper. Is the clerk's office open tomorrow? Until noon. June studied her for several seconds. She did not offer advice. Instead, she wrote the bus departure time on the back of a catalog card and added the distance from the Granville stop to the county offices. Before Rebecca left, June brought her a paper sack containing 2 cheese sandwiches, an apple, and a pair of wool gloves from the library's lost and found drawer. "They have been here since October," she said. "No one has claimed them." Rebecca understood the care with which the sentence had been built. That evening, she sat beneath the station clock with the newspaper folded inside her coat. The property might already have been taken. The county might require fees beyond the amount she possessed. The cottage could be nothing more than wet timbers leaning toward a frozen well. Still, it had a door. Somewhere in the lining of her suitcase was a key that opened nothing she owned. At 6:10 the next morning, Rebecca purchased a one-way ticket south through the mountains, leaving herself $173.23 and no certain way back. When the bus pulled away, snow covered the station bench where she had spent the night, smoothing the boards until there was no sign that anyone had been waiting there at all. By noon, a retired social worker named Arthur Bell would place a hand-worn iron key on a county clerk's desk, and Rebecca would hear the first careful turn of a promise that had been kept for 80 years. The bus climbed out of Middlebury, beneath a sky the color of unpolished tin. Rebecca sat on the right side, where the window gave her a view of fields narrowed by snow and stone walls disappearing beneath drifts. The heater beneath the seat worked in uneven breaths. Each time it stirred, the wet wool of her gloves released the faint smell of leaves and cold earth. There were 7 passengers when the bus departed. By the time it turned south along Route 100, only Rebecca and an elderly man carrying a paper-wrapped parcel remained. The driver knew each bend before it arrived. He slowed where wind had carried snow across the pavement and leaned forward over the wheel as though listening to the road. At Hancock, the old man stepped down beside a white church. The driver watched him cross safely before closing the door. "You are going through to Granville," he said. Rebecca nodded. "Visiting somebody?" "No, sir." He looked at her in the mirror, then returned his eyes to the road. The mountains drew closer. Spruce and balsam stood dark against the slopes, their lower branches buried. In places the road ran beside the White River, where black water moved between shelves of ice. Elsewhere, it passed through cuts in the hillside so narrow that Rebecca could see the marks left by drilling along the stone. She kept the catalog card from June Patel inside one glove. The bus reached Granville at 11:17. There was no station, only a widening beside the road near a general store whose front porch had been enclosed with plastic sheeting. Snow had begun falling again, fine and dry, moving almost sideways beneath the wind. The driver opened the luggage compartment and lifted out the canvas suitcase. The county offices are in the village annex, he said, 3 miles north, then west at the old school road. Rebecca had expected the distance. Seeing the road made it different. Is there a taxi? Not today. He looked toward the snow, then at her shoes. You can wait in the store. I need to be there before noon. The driver removed one glove and checked his watch. You will not walk it in 40 minutes. Rebecca closed her hand around the suitcase handle. I can try. He studied her face, not unkindly. Road, shoulder narrows past the bridge. Stay where they can see you. Then he reached beneath his seat and gave her a square of red cloth. It was a folded emergency flag, stiff from cold. Tie that to your case. She did. The bus pulled away, leaving a pale cloud of exhaust that settled over the roadside snow. Rebecca stood until the sound diminished among the hills. Then she began walking north. The suitcase dragged at her shoulder. The wheel on one corner had broken months earlier, and the remaining wheel caught on frozen gravel. She carried it for 50 paces, rested it against her knee, then carried it again. The temperature had fallen to 9 degrees. A roadside thermometer outside the general store had shown the number in black figures before she passed it. By the bridge, the wind made the cold sharper. It moved down the river channel and found the openings at her cuffs, collar, and shoe seams. Rebecca tied the emergency flag tighter. 2 trucks passed without slowing. A third, loaded with split firewood, eased onto the shoulder several yards ahead. The driver was a woman with cropped gray hair and a wool cap pulled low above her eyebrows. You headed to the annex? Yes, ma'am. Put the case in back. Rebecca climbed into the cab. The woman smelled of wood smoke and peppermint. A pair of leather work gloves rested on the dashboard, and several invoices were clipped beneath a brass spring. You are the girl about the Bellweather place, she said. Rebecca turned toward her. I have not spoken to anyone. Not many people walk toward the county office carrying everything they own. Rebecca looked down at the gloves June had given her. The woman shifted into gear. My name is Marion Pike. I run Pike Fuel and Feed. Rebecca Hayes. Marion's gaze moved briefly toward her. The truck continued north past a boarded filling station, a cemetery crowded with narrow slate markers, and a row of houses built close to the road. Smoke rose from every chimney and flattened beneath the weather. At the old school road, Marion turned west. You know that place is not habitable. The advertisement said so. It said less than it should. Rebecca held the suitcase between her knees. Why has nobody bought it? Some have tried. What happened? Marion rubbed the heel of her hand against the steering wheel. The roof happened. The road happened. February happened. She stopped beside a low brick building with white trim. Before Rebecca could reach for the door handle, Marion said, There is an empty hay barn behind my feed shed. The south stall stays dry. You can sleep there tonight if the clerk sends you away. Rebecca met her eyes. Thank you. Marion looked through the windshield. Do not thank me yet. There are mice. The county annex had once been a 2-room schoolhouse. Its bell tower had been removed, but the square patch where it joined the roof remained visible beneath the snow. A bronze plaque beside the entrance gave the construction date as 1912. Rebecca entered at 11:53. Warm air struck her face with the smell of radiator dust, wet coats, floor wax, and paper. The hallway was narrow. On one side stood the tax office, assessor's room, and a door marked Public Records. On the other was a bulletin board layered with notices for snow plowing, septic services, church suppers, and a missing orange cat. The clerk's office occupied the former classroom. 5 tall windows overlooked the road. Metal shelving covered the back wall, holding deed books bound in faded red cloth. A map of Addison County hung above a cabinet of index cards. Near the door, 3 wooden chairs stood in a row beneath a clock that ran 4 minutes slow. A woman sat behind the counter stamping envelopes. She was perhaps 60, with silver hair gathered at the nape of her neck and a narrow face made softer by round spectacles. Her dark green cardigan had leather patches at the elbows. On the desk stood a black nameplate with white engraved letters. Evelyn Harrow. County Clerk. Rebecca set the newspaper notice on the counter. I came about the Bellweather Cottage. Evelyn Harrow did not look at the notice. She looked at Rebecca's suitcase, the emergency flag tied to its handle, and the thin line of melted snow forming beneath her shoes. You came by bus? Yes, ma'am. And walked from the stop. Part of the way. Marion Pike. Yes, ma'am. Evelyn removed her spectacles and folded them beside the stamp pad. The advertisement required an inquiry before noon. The clock showed 11:58. Rebecca waited. Evelyn turned the notice around, read the reference number, and opened a drawer. From it, she removed a manila folder nearly an inch thick. Sit down. Rebecca chose the nearest chair. Evelyn remained standing. The minimum consideration is $1, she said. That does not mean the cost of the property is $1. I understand. The recording fee is $27. There is a delinquent transfer assessment of $9.50. There will be no refund if you abandon the parcel. Yes, ma'am. The county will not provide snow removal beyond the former settlement road. Yes, ma'am. There is no power line. Yes, ma'am. The hand well failed inspection in 1969. The water has not been tested since. Yes, ma'am. The privy leans east and may not survive heavy snow. Yes, ma'am. The north roof has structural damage. 2 rafters are split. The chimney has lost mortar above the ridge and must not be used until inspected. Yes, ma'am. The cottage is subject to a demolition order. Yes, ma'am? Evelyn placed both hands flat on the counter. You understand that accepting the deed will not cancel that order. Yes, ma'am. You understand that the county can enter the parcel after April 15th and remove the structure. Yes, ma'am. You understand that occupancy is prohibited. Yes, ma'am. Evelyn's mouth tightened slightly. You have said that 9 times. Rebecca counted. I believe it was 10. For a moment, neither woman moved. Then Evelyn sat down. Do you have a permanent address? No, ma'am. A mailing address? The Middlebury Library may hold a letter for me. May. Yes. Employment? Not now. References? Rebecca considered the question. The librarian knows my name. Evelyn put on her spectacles again. The clock reached noon. Somewhere in the hallway, a door closed. A radiator knocked twice and became still. Evelyn opened the folder. Inside were inspection reports, tax sheets, survey drawings, and photographs clipped into groups. The uppermost image showed a timber cottage partly hidden by summer leaves. The photograph had been taken decades earlier. Its corners were rounded, and someone had written Bellweather Way House in pencil along the bottom. This property was offered 3 times, Evelyn said. The first bidder withdrew after viewing the access road. The second intended to salvage the timbers but could not obtain permission to bring machinery through the neighboring parcel. The third failed to appear with payment. Rebecca looked at the photograph. Is anyone else asking today? No. Then I would like to make the offer. Evelyn's eyes remained on her. You have not seen it. The deadline is today. That is not an answer. It is the only property I can afford. Evelyn leaned back. The sensible decision would be to keep your money and find a shelter bed. Rebecca rested both hands on the suitcase. Will the county sell it to me? The clerk looked toward the tall windows. Snow passed across them with increasing speed, blurring the road and the houses beyond it. At last, she drew a single-page form from the folder. You will print your legal name here. Rebecca approached the counter. Evelyn handed her a fountain pen from a stand shaped like a marble base. The nib scratched lightly over the paper. Rebecca Hayes. The letters looked more deliberate than they felt. Evelyn pointed to the next line. Date of birth. Rebecca filled it in. Current residence. She hesitated, then wrote, none. The word occupied little space. Evelyn read it and said nothing. Offer amount. Rebecca wrote, $1. The remaining forms required 7 signatures and 4 sets of initials. One page acknowledged the failed well. Another listed the known defects in the roof, masonry, glazing, flooring, and foundation. A third warned of lead paint, mold, unstable trees, buried debris, and seasonal flooding along the creek. Evelyn read each paragraph aloud before Rebecca signed. When they finished, she counted $37.50 from Rebecca's envelope, placing each bill and coin in the cash drawer. The dollar of consideration was separate. Evelyn held it up to the light, checked the serial number, and folded it once. This goes with the permanent record. She slid it into a narrow envelope and wrote the parcel number across the front. Rebecca had $135.73 left. Evelyn carried the deed to a side table where a heavy brass press stood upon a square of felt. Its handle was curved and darkened where generations of clerks had gripped it. She aligned the paper between the jaws. The press came down with a deep mechanical weight. When Evelyn raised it, the county seal had been impressed into a gold wafer at the bottom of the deed. She touched the edge to make certain it had taken cleanly, then added her signature in the blue-black ink. The sound of the stamp seemed to remain in the room. Not loud. Final. Evelyn returned the document to the counter and placed a sheet of blotting paper over the signature. The filing will be entered this afternoon. Rebecca looked at the deed. Does that mean it is mine? It means the county has transferred its interest to you, subject to every warning I have just read. Yes, ma'am. It does not mean you may safely sleep there. Rebecca folded her hands. No, ma'am. Evelyn took a breath that carried the faintest weariness. Wait here. She left through the records room door. Rebecca remained beside the counter. The deed lay beneath the blotter. Outside, Marion Pike's truck was gone, and new snow had softened the tire marks it left behind. Several minutes passed, then the outer door opened. The man who entered moved carefully, placing one boot before the other as though his knees required negotiation. He wore a brown wool coat polished at the cuffs and a felt hat darkened by snow. A leather document case hung from one hand. His face was narrow, with deep lines running from his nose to the corners of his mouth. White hair showed beneath the hat brim. He seemed older than Samuel had been, though there was something familiar in the way he paused to remove his gloves before approaching the counter. Evelyn returned behind him. Mr. Bell, she said, this is Rebecca Hayes. The man stopped. He did not offer his hand immediately. Hayes, he repeated. Yes, sir. From Bristol? I lived near there. Samuel Hayes was your grandfather? He was my mother's uncle. The man's gaze lowered to the canvas suitcase. Did he teach you the bench? Rebecca felt the question before she understood it. He taught me locks. The man closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, he set the leather case on the counter and unfastened both buckles. Inside lay several envelopes, a folded survey, and an iron key nearly 6 inches long. Its bow was oval and worn thin along one side. The shaft carried a reddish bloom of rust. Unlike Samuel's precise brass keys, this one appeared to have been forged by hand, its bit cut into 3 plain steps. Arthur Bell placed it on the desk. You are late, Evelyn said to him. The plow was turned around at East Warren. You said you would be here by 11. I intended to be. Evelyn looked from him to Rebecca. Mr. Bell has served as the volunteer custodian for the Bellweather parcel since 1989. Rebecca touched neither the deed nor the key. What does custodian mean? Arthur removed his hat. It means I have kept water out where I could, cleared the brush from the chimney, and made certain the place was not stripped. Why? He looked toward the county map. Because someone did it before me. The answer settled between them. Evelyn drew the photograph from the folder and turned it so Arthur could see it. The deed has been signed. Arthur studied Rebecca again. Have you been to the property? No, sir. Has anyone explained the road? Not yet. He nodded once. The road is nearly 2 miles from the maintained highway. Snow will be knee-deep in the open places and deeper beneath the firs. There is a barn halfway up on the old Fenwick parcel. The door is unlatched. You may need to stop there tonight. I can reach the cottage. Arthur's expression did not change. You may. That is not the same as needing to. He opened one of the envelopes and removed a hand-drawn map. The road began at a junction marked with a small square for the Granville General Store. It crossed a bridge, followed a stream, and climbed east through former pasture. Arthur had marked the barn, a spring, 2 stone walls, and a fork where the right-hand track ended at an abandoned sugar house. Keep left at the split, he said. The cottage is beyond the second wall. There are 3 walnut trees near the clearing. They should be visible even in snow. Walnut, planted trees, not native to that elevation. Who planted them? Arthur glanced at Evelyn. No one has been able to prove it. The clerk gathered the deed pages and slid them into a large envelope. Arthur's attention returned to Rebecca. Samuel came to Bellweather once. Rebecca remained very still. When? 1981. She counted backward. He never told me. He did not tell many people. Why did he come? Arthur placed 2 fingers on the iron key and turned it until the worn side faced upward. He repaired the lock on the east door. Rebecca looked at the bit. The edges carried fine, regular file marks. Near the shoulder of the shaft, almost hidden beneath rust, someone had cut a shallow H. Samuel's mark. It was the letter he stamped inside locks he repaired, never on the visible plate. Always somewhere a future workman might find it. Rebecca lifted the key. The iron was colder than the room. Arthur watched the way she held it between thumb and first finger, balancing its weight rather than gripping it tightly. He also left instructions, he said. What kind? That the key was not to be handed over merely because someone paid the $1. Evelyn adjusted the folder. The county did not include that condition in the sale. No, Arthur said. It was not a legal condition. Rebecca waited. He closed the leather case without replacing the map. Samuel told me I would know the right person by what they asked first. What did the others ask? One asked whether the beams were chestnut. Another asked how quickly demolition could be delayed. The last asked whether there were antiques inside. Arthur's pale eyes remained on hers. What do you ask? Rebecca looked down at the key. Its bow had been polished by hands she could not count. Rust remained in the narrow corners where fingers did not touch. Who kept the door from freezing shut? Arthur's face changed so slightly that another person might have missed it. The muscles around his mouth loosened. His shoulders lowered beneath the wool coat. I did, he said. And Marion Pike before me. Before Marion, Walter Crowell. Before Walter, a woman named Elsie Moore. Why? Arthur put on his hat. That answer belongs to the house. Evelyn handed Rebecca the deed envelope. Mr. Bell can drive you to the settlement road. Arthur looked toward the windows. I can take her to the lower bridge. Beyond that, the truck will not clear the drifts. Rebecca placed the iron key inside her coat. They left the annex at 12:46. Arthur's truck was an aging Ford with a green hood, a gray passenger door, and a heater that produced more noise than warmth. A snow shovel, 2 wool blankets, a coil of rope, and a covered tin pail lay behind the seat. The village passed slowly beyond the windshield. Rebecca counted the businesses along the main road because naming them made the place feel measurable. There was Pike Fuel and Feed with sacks of grain stacked behind fogged windows. There was Crowell Hardware beneath a sign missing one corner. There was Doris's Cafe, where a painted cup steamed above the entrance. There was a post office with 2 flags stiffened by snow. Farther on stood Bell's Pharmacy and sundries, though the gilt letters had faded until only Pharmacy remained clear. A 6th building, the Granville Cooperative Creamery, had been closed long enough for snow to gather inside the loading bay. People moved behind windows. At the cafe, a broad woman in a white apron stood with one hand on the glass and watched Arthur's truck pass. Outside the hardware store, a man carrying a shovel stopped beneath the awning. Neither waved. Their attention followed the truck until it turned away. "Do they know where we are going?" Rebecca asked. "Yes." "Does everyone?" "By supper." Arthur drove north, then turned east onto a road narrowed by snowbanks. The houses stood farther apart here. A black dog ran beside the truck for nearly a quarter mile, barking without anger, its breath visible around its muzzle. At the final mailbox, Arthur stopped. A woman in a red coat was clearing snow from her steps. She leaned on the shovel as they passed. Beside her house, 2 children pressed their faces to a downstairs window. The road descended toward a covered bridge. Arthur crossed in low gear. Beyond it, the plowed surface ended. A pair of stone posts marked the beginning of the former settlement road. One had fallen inward. The other carried a rusted metal plate on which only the letters Bell could still be read. Arthur parked beside the posts. The snow had reached 15 inches in the open. He took the shovel from behind the seat and used it to clear a place where Rebecca could set down her suitcase. Then he lifted the tin pail. Coffee, bread, 2 jars of soup, matches in the lid. "I cannot pay you. They are not for sale." He placed the pail beside the suitcase. From beneath the blankets, he removed a folded pair of snowshoes made from ash and rawhide. Rebecca looked at them. "I have never used those. You will learn before the first wall." Arthur knelt and showed her how the leather bindings crossed above the boot, how the heel remained free, and how each step had to lift the frame rather than drag it. His fingers moved with exact patience despite their stiffness. "The snow will be deeper beneath the hemlocks," he said. "If darkness catches you at the barn, stop there. I will reach the cottage." Arthur straightened. Pride spends heat quickly. Rebecca adjusted the straps. "I am not proud." "No," he said. "You are afraid that stopping will become staying." The words were spoken without accusation. Rebecca looked toward the unplowed road. Snow moved through the bare upper branches, sifting into the track where no recent wheel had passed. Arthur placed the map inside the deed envelope. "You have 3 hours of light. Will the key work?" Samuel made certain of it. Arthur did not say goodbye. He waited beside the truck while Rebecca learned the first awkward steps. The snowshoes crossed twice, nearly turning her sideways. On the 3rd attempt, she found a wider rhythm. The suitcase was too heavy to carry at her side, so she tied the emergency flag through its handle and pulled it behind her on the smoother sections. At the first bend, she looked back. Arthur remained beside the stone post, one hand resting on the shovel. Then the road entered the trees. The forest altered the sound of the weather. Wind moved above the spruce crowns, but below them the air was hushed. Snow fell from branches in sudden soft collapses. The only steady noise came from the suitcase sliding behind her and the rawhide webbing creaking beneath her boots. The road climbed beside a narrow creek. Water moved under ice with a low, continuous murmur. In 2 places, the stream crossed beneath stone culverts built from slabs laid without mortar. One opening had filled with frozen leaves, forcing water across the road in a glazed brown sheet. Rebecca stepped around it carefully. The first stone wall appeared after 40 minutes. It ran north through the trees, its upper stones wearing rounded caps of snow. Beyond it stood the remains of an orchard. The trunks were bent and silver, most no thicker than a wrist. A few retained black apples shriveled against the branches. She rested there and ate half a sandwich from June's paper sack. The cold stiffened the bread. Her money, deed, Samuel's brass shaving, and the iron key remained inside her coat, held near her body. She checked each without removing it. The road steepened. At 2:20, the sky darkened, though sunset remained more than an hour away. Clouds had lowered against the ridge, taking the upper forest from view. Snow gathered on Rebecca's hat brim and along the shoulders of her coat. The suitcase caught between two buried stones. When she pulled, the loose buckle opened. A sweater and the road atlas slid into the snow. Rebecca stopped. She brushed each page edge with her glove, closed the atlas, and repacked the case. Then she tore a strip from the emergency flag and tied both buckles together. The red cloth made a narrow, deliberate knot. At 3, she reached the hay barn. It stood downhill from the road, one side bowed but dry beneath a steep metal roof. Arthur had been correct about the south stall. The door opened with a push, revealing old hay, a feed trough, and a wooden ladder leading to the loft. For several minutes, Rebecca remained inside. The barn blocked the wind. It smelled of dry grass, mice, and iron from the rusted hinges. A horse collar hung from one peg. Someone had placed a folded wool blanket across the feed trough. The light beyond the doorway had already begun to fade. She could stop. No one would call it failure. Arthur had marked the place. Marion had offered another barn. The county had forbidden occupancy. Every sensible voice had left room for retreat. Rebecca lifted the suitcase again. She continued uphill. The second wall appeared at 3:32. Beyond it, the road became little more than a shallow depression between trees. Snow reached the tops of the snowshoes. Rebecca advanced slowly, taking 20 steps before resting, then 20 more. At the fork, she kept left. The right-hand path descended toward a dark structure collapsed beneath the weight of its roof. The left climbed between 2 rows of maples and past a stone foundation filled with young firs. Then the forest opened. 3 walnut trees stood at the far edge of the clearing. Their trunks were broad and deeply furrowed, their limbs spreading with the balanced shape of trees that had grown without crowding. Snow rested along the upper branches. Beneath them, the ground sloped toward a dark line of creek. The cottage stood beyond the nearest tree. It was larger than the photograph had suggested and more weathered than any report could make plain. The front measured roughly 18 feet across, with hand-hewn timbers darkened almost black by age. Chinking had fallen from several joints. The foundation was fieldstone, rising nearly 3 feet on the downhill side. The roof pitched steeply from a central ridge. Its southern half remained covered with wood shingles silvered by weather. The northern slope had collapsed inward around the broken limb of a beech tree, leaving a jagged opening beneath a torn strip of roofing felt. A stone chimney rose from the western wall. Its upper courses leaned slightly, and several bricks had lost their faces to frost. There were 4 windows visible from the clearing. 1 retained wavy glass. 2 were covered with boards. The 4th was open to the weather, its sash hanging from a single cord. A narrow porch extended across the front. Above the door, beneath the eave, hung a wooden sign. Snow obscured most of the lettering. Rebecca set down the suitcase and brushed the surface with her sleeve. Bellweather Way House, the letters had been carved by hand and painted many times. Beneath them, in smaller script, was a line nearly worn away. For those between road. Rebecca stood beneath the sign while snow settled around her boots. The front door was oak, built from 3 broad vertical boards held by iron straps. Its lock plate had a narrow keyway and a small brass escutcheon darkened almost brown. She removed the iron key. The bit entered halfway and stopped. Rebecca did not force it. She withdrew the key, cleared ice from the opening with the edge of a catalog card, and warmed the shaft between both gloves. Then she inserted it again, lifting slightly, as Samuel had taught her, when a lock sagged within an aged door. The key advanced. She turned it to the right. Inside, a spring resisted. The bolt moved a fraction, stopped, and then traveled with a low iron sound that seemed larger than the door. The latch released. Rebecca pushed. Cold air came first, carrying the dry smell of timber, ashes, mouse nests, and fabric long closed from sunlight. The door scraped across the floor before opening wide enough for her to enter. She stepped inside and listened. Snow whispered through the roof opening in the rear corner. Somewhere beneath the floor, water gave a single hollow drip. The loose window sash tapped lightly against its frame. The front room occupied most of the cottage. Late daylight entered through the surviving glass, bending around its rippled surface and laying a faint gray square across the floor. A cast-iron stove stood near the western wall, its pipe disconnected and resting beside it. There was a table, 2 ladder-back chairs, a narrow cupboard, and a built-in bookshelf crowded with jars, folded cloth, and several unlabeled tins. Nothing had been stripped. A wool rug had been rolled and tied beneath the table. 3 enamel cups hung from hooks near the stove. A broom stood in one corner. Beside the door was a stack of split maple firewood, each piece dry and cut to the same length. Rebecca touched the top log. There was no dust on it. She turned toward the room. The mantel held 2 candle stubs, a box of wooden matches, and a small pottery bowl filled with dried apple peels. On the table stood a glass jar of coffee beans sealed with a wire clasp. Beside it lay a folded paper bag containing salt, oats, and 6 sugar cubes wrapped individually in wax paper. These were not remnants from 1971. Someone had placed them here recently. The back room lay through a low doorway beneath the stairs. It contained a rope bed, a washstand, a cedar chest, and shelves built into the wall. 2 folded blankets rested at the foot of the bed. A basin held a clean bar of yellow soap and a washcloth. The ceiling above the bed was sound. Rebecca returned to the front room and closed the door. The latch settled into place. Wind pressed once against the outer boards and passed on. She did not light the stove. Arthur's warning about the chimney remained precise. Instead, she unrolled the wool rug and spread it near the eastern wall, away from the damaged roof. She found a canvas tarp in the cupboard and hung it from 2 nails to block the draft from the glassless window. The room darkened quickly. Rebecca lit 1 candle. Its flame revealed more than daylight had shown. Fine, saw marks remained visible in the table boards. Names had been cut beneath the chair seats. Someone had mended the rug with blue wool. The enamel cups were mismatched, 1 white, 1 green, 1 marked with a ring of red at the rim. She opened the tin pail. Arthur had packed 2 thick slices of brown bread, a jar of vegetable soup, a smaller jar of coffee, and a spoon wrapped in cloth. Beneath them was a corked stoneware bottle filled with hot water. It had cooled, but not entirely. Rebecca wrapped the bottle in one of the blankets and placed it near her feet. She ate the soup cold because she would not risk the stove. The carrots were soft, the barley swollen, and a bay leaf had been left in the bottom of the jar. She drank water from Arthur's bottle and saved half the bread for morning. Outside, night gathered around the clearing. The cottage changed as the temperature fell. Timbers contracted with slow knocks. The roof creaked beneath accumulating snow. A small animal moved once beneath the porch, paused, then scratched its way toward the foundation. Rebecca sat with the iron key in her lap. The house did not feel abandoned. Abandonment had a certain disorder. It left cupboards open, papers scattered, hinges broken without repair. This room had been swept, the firewood had been kept dry. Coffee waited in a sealed jar. Someone had folded the blankets with the edges aligned. Someone had known she might come before knowing her name. Near 8 o'clock, headlights moved briefly through the trees below the clearing. Rebecca extinguished the candle and went to the window. The light stopped near the first wall. It remained there for perhaps a minute, too distant for her to see the vehicle. Then it turned and disappeared. Arthur checking the road. Or Marion. Rebecca returned to the rug. She kept her coat on and placed one blanket beneath her, the other above. The suitcase served as a pillow. Before lying down, she slid the deed envelope under her coat and set the iron key inside her closed hand. The floor was hard. Cold gathered along the boards, but the canvas tarp reduced the draft, and the stone bottle released its remaining warmth slowly against her ankles. For a long while, she watched the candle smoke fade beneath the rafters. She listened to the roof, the wind, and the careful settling of a building that had carried winter before she was born. No footsteps approached, no voice called her name. Nothing in the room demanded that she explain why she had come. Before sleep reached her, Rebecca noticed a small mark cut into the lowest stair riser. It was the same shallow H Samuel had left upon the key. She extended one hand and rested her fingertips against it. The house had been waiting. At first light, Rebecca carried the empty soup jar outside and followed a line of fox tracks toward the well. The snow had stopped during the night. A pale morning rested over the clearing, revealing the shapes darkness had withheld: the creek below the walnut trees, a collapsed rail fence along the northern boundary, and the foundation of a second building half buried beneath brambles. The cottage roof held 6 fresh inches, except where the broken beech limb entered the northern slope and left a black wound around itself. The well stood 30 yards east of the porch. Its housing was a square box of gray boards beneath a pitched wooden cap. An iron pump rose through the center, its handle angled downward and fixed there by rust. Rebecca cleared snow from the platform with a board found beneath the porch. She tried the handle once. It did not move. She wrapped both hands around it and leaned until the iron pressed through her gloves, but the joint remained fixed. Frost had gathered where the shaft entered the pump head. A split in the leather cup below could have caused the failure. So could ice inside the cylinder. She did not yet know enough to choose between them. Near the housing, someone had placed 2 galvanized buckets upside down upon a stump. Both were clean. Rebecca carried one to the creek. The bank was steep beneath the walnut trees, and snow concealed several loose stones. She descended sideways, testing each step before shifting her weight. At the water's edge, the current had opened a black channel between plates of ice. She broke the nearest crust with a branch, filled the bucket, and carried it back using both hands. By the time she reached the porch, water had frozen in a bright fringe along the rim. She poured some into the wash basin, cleaned her face, then placed the rest near the stove. She did not drink it. The creek ran clear, but clear water could carry what the eye did not see. Breakfast was the remaining bread, 1 sugar cube, and an apple cut into 8 pieces with a blunt kitchen knife. Rebecca saved the seeds on the windowsill before recognizing the gesture. Samuel had done the same. She left them there. The privy stood behind the cottage beneath 2 hemlocks. It leaned east, as Evelyn had warned, though not enough to have separated from its fieldstone footing. One hinge had pulled loose, leaving the door to drag over the threshold. Snow entered through a gap beneath the roof and lay across the seat in a narrow white stripe. Rebecca found a coffee tin of roofing nails on a shelf inside the cottage. With a stone for a hammer, she reset the hinge well enough for the door to close. The repair was poor. It held. For the first 3 days, she worked only on what winter required. She cleared the porch and a narrow path to the creek. She stuffed folded cloth into the worst gaps between the wall timbers, saving the original chinking where it remained sound. She moved the bed from the back room into the front, because the damaged roof had begun dripping near the footboard when afternoon warmth loosened the snow. She learned which boards complained beneath her weight. The 3rd plank east of the stove gave a long descending creak. The threshold clicked twice. A pine board near the backroom doorway made no sound at all, though its surface had been worn hollow at the center. At night, the timbers answered the cold with knocks that traveled from wall to wall. By the 2nd evening, Rebecca could tell the difference between the house settling and the loose sash striking its frame. By the 3rd, she knew the mouse beneath the cupboard emerged after the candle had burned halfway down. She found no trap and made none. Instead, she moved the oats into a lidded stoneware crock and swept the crumbs from the table. The mouse continued its rounds, but farther from her bed. Arthur came on the morning of the second day. Rebecca heard snowshoes before she saw him. He crossed the clearing carrying a canvas pack and a narrow wooden case beneath one arm. His felt hat had gathered frost along the brim. "You stayed," he said. Rebecca opened the door wider. "Yes, sir." He stepped inside and examined the room without appearing to. His gaze passed over the tarp, the moved bed, the bucket, and the disconnected stovepipe. "You did not light a fire. The chimney has not been checked." Arthur nodded. From the pack he removed a loaf of bread, a jar of beans, 2 onions, a packet of coffee, and a covered enamel pot. Rebecca looked at the food. "Who paid for this?" "Several people refused to let me. I cannot keep taking things. You can keep accounts." He set a small, ruled notebook on the table. Rebecca opened it. The first page bore a date, followed by Arthur's careful handwriting. Bread, Doris Vale, 40 cents. Beans, Marion Pike, 35 cents. Coffee, Evelyn Harrow, 28 cents. Lamp oil, Arthur Bell, 22 cents. At the bottom, he had written, "Payment may be labor, goods, or the same kindness passed forward." Rebecca closed the book. Who decided that? No one who is still alive. Arthur set the wooden case beside the stove. Inside was a chimney brush with stiff wire bristles, 6 threaded fiberglass rods, a scraper, a hand mirror, and a pair of canvas gloves blackened by soot. "You will need these. Will you show me?" "I will show you what not to do." He spent 20 minutes inspecting the stove and flue opening. He crouched near the hearth, held the mirror inside the chimney throat, and angled it toward the light from the window. "The lower flue is blocked with creosote and 2 nests," he said. "The upper masonry still needs looking at from outside. Can I clean it? You can clean what you can reach safely. Will that make it usable?" "No." Rebecca waited. Arthur closed the case. "It will make it closer." He left before noon, refusing coffee because she had not yet heated water. On the third day, Rebecca walked back to Granville. She left the cottage at 7, while the snow remained firm from the night's cold. The snowshoes carried her over the upper drifts, but below the first wall the road had been packed by Arthur's truck and a pair of narrow sled runners. The barn door stood open. Inside, the wool blanket had been folded across the trough again. Beside it sat a paper sack containing 2 hard-boiled eggs and a jar of pickled beets. No note had been left. Rebecca wrote both items in the account book after returning that evening. At the maintained road, she tied the snowshoes together and carried them over one shoulder. The walk into Granville took another hour and a half. Morning sun had lifted above the ridge, but the temperature remained below 15 degrees, and her breath gathered as frost along the scarf at her chin. Crowell Hardware stood between Doris's cafe and the post office. The storefront windows were crowded with objects that had faded unevenly in years of sunlight. Red kerosene cans, galvanized funnels, axe handles, stovepipe elbows, seed packets, and a cardboard advertisement for a furnace company no longer in business. A hand-lettered sign on the door read, "Open," though the lower half of the O had worn away. A brass bell sounded when Rebecca entered. Warmth met her first, then the compound smell of the place: machine oil, burlap, paraffin, leather, fertilizer, cedar shavings, and coffee heated too long on a backroom stove. The aisles were narrow. Wooden drawers lined one wall from floor to ceiling, each fitted with a white porcelain knob and a handwritten label. Cotter pins, washers, escutcheon screws, lamp wicks, harness rivets, stove cement, glass points. The opposite shelves held tools in open boxes, their handles turned outward for inspection. Behind the counter stood a man with shoulders broad enough to make the space appear smaller. His hair was gray and cut close. One ear bent outward at the top as though it had once been folded beneath something heavy. The left sleeve of his flannel shirt ended above the wrist, revealing a polished wooden prosthesis shaped into a simple hook. He was weighing nails on a balance scale. "You are Hayes," he said. Rebecca set down the snowshoes. "Yes, sir." "Walter Crowell." He added 3 nails to the brass pan, watched the needle settle, and tipped the measure into a paper sack. My father knew Samuel. Rebecca looked at the drawers behind him. A lot of people seemed to have known him. Not well. Walter folded the sack twice and wrote 8 pence common across the top. Samuel was not easy to know well. No. Walter glanced toward her. The resemblance was not in his face, but in the refusal to fill silence merely because it existed. "What do you need?" Rebecca removed a sheet of paper from her coat. She had made the list at the cottage table, dividing it into 3 columns. Necessary now, necessary before April, and necessary eventually. For now, a chimney cleaning rod, stove cement, 2 feet of 6-inch stovepipe, 3 elbows if the old ones cannot be saved, a water testing container, 2 pounds of oakum, a pry bar, a handsaw, a hammer, nails, window covering, lamp oil, and something to free the well pump. Walter held out his hand. Rebecca gave him the list. He read it without comment. "How much money have you got?" $133.91. "You counted the breakfast you bought?" "Yes." "You owe recording costs?" "Paid." "Taxes?" "Not until next year." "Demolition bond?" No one mentioned one. "They will." Rebecca folded her hands inside the borrowed gloves. "I need to know the prices before I choose." Walter placed the list on the counter. "You need to know which purchase prevents the next loss." He came around the counter and walked toward the rear shelves. His wooden hook rested against his shirt with a faint tap. He selected a quart can of stove cement. 38 cents. A coil of oakum. 72. A clear sample bottle with a sterile paper seal. 20. A gallon tin of lamp oil. 44. He found a roll of heavy building paper, opened the outer layer, and measured 8 yards along a brass rule fixed to the counter. $1.12. Rebecca wrote each price beside the item. Walter examined the stovepipe she described and said the old length could probably be cleaned if it was not rusted through. He advised against buying elbows until the existing joints had been separated and measured. For the well pump, he sold her a 4-ounce bottle of penetrating oil for 29 cents and told her not to pour hot water over cast iron in freezing weather. "It may crack. What should I do?" "Oil the pivot. Wrap the head in dark cloth when the sun is out. Move it 1 inch, then stop. And if it does not move, do not prove you are stronger than it." He took a 16-ounce claw hammer from the wall. Rebecca lifted it, felt the balance, and returned it. "How much?" $1.80. She looked toward a bin of used tools beneath the counter. Walter followed her gaze. From the bin, he removed a hammer with a dark hickory handle and a face polished almost white by use. 75. Rebecca tested it. The handle fit her palm. "I will take this one." Walter nodded. The handsaw cost $2.10. A flat pry bar cost 90 cents. Nails were sold by weight. 20 cents for a pound of 6-penny finish nails, 18 cents for 8-penny common, and 24 cents for 10-penny galvanized nails. She bought 1 pound of each. For temporary glazing, Walter cut clear vinyl from a roll at 17 cents a yard. He added narrow lath strips from a scrap box without weighing them. Rebecca noticed. "How much for the wood?" "Nothing. It has value. It has no inventory number." He carried the purchases to the counter and began writing them in a ledger. Rebecca placed the necessary money beside the scale. Walter did not take it. "I am opening an account. I did not ask for credit. No, I may not be able to pay. That is why the account will be limited." He turned the ledger around. At the top of a fresh page he had written, Bellweather Way House. Custodian, Rebecca Hayes. Below that, he had entered each item and its price. The total came to $8.92. Rebecca read the heading twice. The deed is in my name. The account is not for the owner. Then who is it for? The person doing the work. Walter placed a pencil beside the ledger. Limit is $25. No interest before June. After June, we decide whether you pay in money or labor. You sign every purchase. Rebecca looked at the total. Why would you do that? My father's name is under 6 roofs in this county that never paid him. That is not a reason. No, Walter said. It is an explanation. He reached beneath the counter and brought out a thick paperback manual. Its cover showed a line drawing of a farmhouse divided into numbered sections. Practical Repair of Rural Houses, Vermont Agricultural Extension Service. Revised edition, 1964. The pages were stained and swollen from damp. Notes had been written in several margins. This is not for sale, Walter said. I will return it. No one has returned it since 1978. He placed it on top of the supplies. Read the roof section before touching the roof. Read the chimney section before believing the roof section tells you enough. Rebecca turned the book over. On the inside cover, written in pencil, was a name. Arthur Bell. Beneath it, in darker ink, Samuel Hayes. Rebecca traced neither. She signed the ledger. Walter packed the smaller purchases inside a wooden produce crate and tied the crate to a child's sled from the rear storeroom. The sled is not on the account, he said. Why not? It belongs to Doris. Rebecca looked toward the wall shared with the cafe. She knows I am here? Walter's bent ear shifted slightly. Everyone knows. Doris Vale was waiting when Rebecca stepped outside. She stood beneath the cafe awning in a white apron and red cardigan, holding a lidded paper cup. Her hair was the color of flour and gathered into a knot high on her head. She was broad through the shoulders and hips with forearms shaped by kneading dough. This is coffee, she said. It is not charity. Walter has already put you into debt, and I will not let him have the pleasure alone. Rebecca accepted the cup. Thank you. Arthur says you are not using the stove. Not yet. Good. Fire is obedient only after it has been taught where to go. Doris glanced at the sled. You have bread? Some. That means no. She returned inside before Rebecca could object and came back with a loaf wrapped in brown paper. Write it in your little book. Rebecca had not mentioned the account book. Doris looked toward the snowy road. My grandmother carried that book before Arthur. She released the loaf. Keep the pages dry. Rebecca reached the lower bridge before dusk. Pulling the sled was easier than carrying the crate, though it caught at the edges of ruts and tipped twice on the steepest turn. At the hay barn she stopped, ate one hard-boiled egg, and read the chimney chapter while daylight faded through gaps in the boards. The manual used no comforting language. It described creosote as combustible residue formed when smoke cooled before complete burning. It warned that a layer exceeding 1/8 inch could ignite under sustained heat. It explained how glazed deposits differed from dry soot, how masonry flues cracked under thermal shock, and why unlined chimneys required inspection across their full height. Rebecca read the chapter again. Then she continued by lantern light. The supplies remained dry beneath the tarp Walter had tied over the crate. The next morning, she began cleaning the lower chimney. First, she removed the disconnected stovepipe and carried each section onto the porch. The first pipe contained a compacted nest of grass, bark, and mouse hair. The second held dry flakes of soot nearly 1/2 inch deep. Rebecca tapped the pipes with a wooden block rather than the hammer, loosening deposits without denting the thin metal. She pushed a rag through each length using one fiberglass rod, then held the sections toward the window to check for pinholes. A rusted seam near one end admitted a blade of light. She marked it with chalk. Inside, she spread the rolled building paper over the floor and sealed its edges with stones. She draped an old sheet around the fireplace opening, leaving a slit for her arms and the brush rod. Before using the brush, she examined the flue with Arthur's hand mirror. The lower throat narrowed above the smoke shelf. Black material coated the rear wall in uneven layers. Some was powdery. Some reflected the candle flame with a hard, glazed surface. She began with the scraper. Each movement released soot that fell in slow bursts behind the sheet. The smell was bitter and oily. It entered her hair, worked through the canvas gloves, and settled into the seams of her clothes. She scraped for 40 minutes, rested her shoulders, and began again. At noon, she had filled one coffee tin. The upper flue remained blocked. Rebecca carried the ladder from the collapsed outbuilding and tested every rung before leaning it against the southern eave. The ladder was too short to reach the ridge, but from the upper rung she could see the chimney crown. Snow had gathered along its western side. 2 bricks near the top had spalled until their faces resembled broken bread. Mortar was missing from 3 vertical joints. A rusted wire cap leaned over the opening. She did not climb farther. Instead, she tied the chimney brush to a rope, climbed onto the lower porch roof, and threw the weighted end across the ridge 3 times before it passed near enough to retrieve from the other side. By joining the fiberglass rods from below, she could push the brush upward while using the rope to guide it through the tightest section. The first attempt failed after 6 feet. The brush met something firm. Rebecca withdrew it, rotated the rods, and tried again. Twigs fell into the firebox, then moss, then a length of cloth so decayed that it separated when touched. A second nest had been built above the bend. She continued until the brush emerged through the chimney cap, visible as a dark circle against the winter sky. It took 5 hours. The soot pile behind the sheet rose nearly to her wrist. Rebecca shoveled it into a lidded metal bucket and carried it outside, setting it far from the cottage walls. She wiped the smoke shelf, brushed the firebox, and cleaned the stove's internal baffle with an iron poker. The glazed creosote remained. Arthur returned near sunset. He stood in the doorway while Rebecca removed the sheet. Her face was streaked black except around the eyes. Soot had settled in the lines of her hands and beneath every fingernail. Arthur examined the bucket, the rods, and the marked stovepipe. "You found the upper nest." "Yes." "Glaze?" "Along the back wall. Less than an 1/8 inch in most places. Thicker above the smoke shelf." "Did you chip it?" "Only what released without force." He nodded. "Good. Can I use the stove?" Arthur removed his coat. "Not yet." He inspected the chimney from inside and then outside, using a pair of field glasses from the clearing. He agreed that the masonry above the roof would need rebuilding, but said the lower flue might hold a controlled test if the cracked pipe section was replaced and the joint sealed. Rebecca opened the manual to the section she had marked. A test fire with newspaper first, then kindling, then one split no larger than 2 inches. Arthur looked at the page. "You read it. 3 times. That book improves after the second." They returned to Crowell Hardware the following morning in Arthur's truck. Walter cut a replacement section of 6-inch black stovepipe, crimped one end, and charged 86 cents. He included furnace cement for each joint and 3 sheet metal screws per connection. "Not 1, he said. Not 2. 3. Equally spaced." Rebecca wrote the instruction in the margin of the manual. They reassembled the pipe that afternoon. She seated the crimped ends toward the stove so creosote would remain inside the pipe rather than leak through the joints. She drove the screws by hand, each one placed approximately 120 degrees from the others. Arthur applied no tool himself. He watched, corrected the angle of one elbow, and told her to remove excess cement before it hardened. At 4:15, they opened the nearest window 2 inches. Rebecca twisted a single sheet of newspaper and placed it beneath the flue opening. She lit one corner. The paper burned with a thin yellow flame. Smoke rose, hesitated, and spilled slightly into the room. Arthur raised one hand. They waited. As heat entered the flue, the draft strengthened. The smoke narrowed and climbed. Rebecca added 3 pieces of dry maple kindling, each no thicker than her thumb. They caught slowly. The stovepipe ticked as it warmed. Arthur went outside to watch the chimney. When he returned, a few snowflakes had melted on his shoulders. "Light smoke," he said. "No sparks." Rebecca placed one split of maple on the kindling. The flame moved along its lower edge, first blue, then orange. Heat reached her face with such modesty that she almost mistook it for memory. The stove had not yet warmed the room. The floor remained cold. Her gloves were damp from snow, and the roof still open toward the sky at the northern corner. Yet fire had entered the house and gone where it was asked. Rebecca sat on the floor. Arthur did not speak. After 20 minutes, he inspected the stovepipe joints with the back of his hand, then walked outside once more. When he returned, he removed his hat and placed it on the table. "You may keep it small tonight." "How small?" "1 split at a time. No banking. Let it die before sleep." Rebecca set a saucepan over the stove. She filled it with creek water and held the boil for a full minute, watching large bubbles turn the surface. Then she added oats, salt, and half an onion cut into fine pieces. The meal was plain, but it was hot. Arthur accepted 1 bowl. They ate at the table, while the stove released a dry iron smell and the window slowly cleared in a circle above it. Before leaving, Arthur wrote the fire test into the account book. Chimney first draft restored. Labor carried forward. Rebecca slept beneath both blankets. The embers had gone dark before midnight, but warmth remained in the stove body and traveled slowly through the front room. For the first time since the porch light had gone out behind her, she woke because morning had arrived rather than because cold had forced her awake. On the 5th day, she began the inventory. The manual advised owners of neglected houses to record before discarding. Rebecca used the back pages of the account book for temporary notes, then copied the final list onto sheets found in the desk drawer. Front room, 1 cast-iron box stove, maker's name obscured by surface rust. 1 maple table, 30 by 48 inches, drawer missing its rear stop. 2 ladder-back chairs, 1 sound, 1 with split rush seat. 1 built-in cupboard with 3 shelves, 3 enamel cups, 4 iron spoons, 1 2-quart saucepan, 1 coffee mill with cracked wooden handle, 1 kerosene lamp, chimney intact, 1 rolled wool rug repaired in blue yarn, 1 broom, birch twig binding sound, 1 iron candlestick, 1 shelf containing 9 jars, salt, oats, coffee, dried beans, rice, 2 empty, 1 holding nails, 1 holding apple seeds. Back room, 1 rope bed, walnut rails, footboard repaired, 2 wool blankets, 1 feather pillow flattened beyond use, 1 washstand, 1 ceramic basin, 1 cedar chest with brass corners, 1 narrow shelf holding soap, cloth, 6 candles, needles, thread, and a folded linen towel. Workbench room. The smallest room lay behind a door Rebecca had first mistaken for paneling near the rear of the cottage. It measured perhaps 8 feet by 10 and had no exterior window, only a square vent cut high in the wall. The room contained a bench. Not Samuel's bench. This one was narrower, built from maple planks nearly 3 inches thick, its surface scarred by chisels, awls, burns, and circular stains. A leg vise was fixed to the left side. Beneath the top ran 6 drawers of different widths. Rebecca opened them in order. The first held rusted screws sorted into folded paper packets. The second contained steel springs, latch tongues, escutcheon plates, and 6 empty key rings. The third held files. Most were unusable, their teeth softened by rust, but 3 had been wrapped in oiled cloth, a half-round file, a slim taper file, a warding file with a walnut handle darkened by years of use. Rebecca lifted it. A narrow split ran from the ferrule toward the center of the handle. Near the end was a small burn mark shaped like a crescent. Her own file had carried the same mark. She remembered Samuel leaving it too near the hot plate one winter morning, then rubbing the blackened wood with beeswax after it cooled. Rebecca sat down on the workbench stool. She turned the file beneath the light from the doorway. The handle was not merely similar, it was the one lost at auction. She knew the length of the split. She knew the smooth hollow where her thumb had rested through hundreds of practice cuts. Near the ferrule, barely visible beneath oil, were 2 initials scratched by a 12-year-old hand. R.H. Rebecca laid the file across her knees. No explanation presented itself. Samuel's small tools had been sold before she arrived. The buyer could have brought them here, though no buyer knew the file mattered. Arthur might have recovered it, though he had said nothing. Walter's father might have purchased the lot. Any of these were possible. None explained why it had been wrapped inside a drawer in a cottage Samuel had visited decades earlier. Rebecca continued the inventory. The 4th drawer held brass blanks in 11 sizes, most tarnished but uncut. The 5th contained a hand drill, 4 bits, a small riveting hammer, and a steel punch stamped with the letter B inside a circle. The 6th was empty except for a cedar disc 3 inches across. She picked it up. The disc had been cut from aromatic wood and sanded smooth. One surface carried a carved symbol, a key laid across an open doorway. The other bore 3 shallow notches. Rebecca set it beside the walnut-handled file. Above the bench, tools hung in dark outlines where others had once been removed. 2 chisels remained. So did a draw knife, a pair of dividers, a small square, and an oilstone worn concave at the center. On the lowest shelf stood a wooden box of raw materials, brass strip, iron rod, copper wire, leather scraps, and blocks of beeswax wrapped in paper. Each had been labeled in a hand Rebecca did not recognize. Nothing in the room had been abandoned carelessly. It had been put away. Rebecca spent the afternoon wiping tools with oil and separating salvageable metal from what had rusted beyond use. She did not attempt to sharpen the files. She did not begin cutting a key. The workbench belonged to a history she had not yet understood, and she would not disturb its order merely to prove she recognized the craft. Near dusk, she returned the cedar disc to the 6th drawer. It did not settle flat. One edge remained slightly raised. Rebecca removed it and examined the drawer bottom. The wood appeared ordinary, thin pine, fitted within grooves along the sides. Yet the left rear corner gave a faint, hollow sound when A tapped with the handle of the riveting hammer. She tapped the right corner. Solid. The center. Solid. The left rear again. Hollow. Rebecca removed the drawer and placed it on the bench. It weighed more than its contents justified. She took out the drill, bits, hammer, and punch, then weighed the empty drawer in both hands. The rear remained heavier. A false back might account for it, but the dovetails showed no seam. She measured the inside depth against the outer dimension using the small square. The difference was nearly 2 inches greater than the thickness of the visible rear board. Rebecca ran her fingertips along the grooves. No catch. She turned the drawer over. The underside carried scratches from decades of use. Near the rear, 3 marks had been cut into the pine. 3 shallow notches. Rebecca looked at the cedar disc. Its reverse carried the same arrangement. She aligned the notches with the marks beneath the drawer. The carved key on the disc now pointed toward the left side. Press. Nothing moved. She rotated the disc 1/4 turn and tried again. Still nothing. The disc was too deliberate to be decoration. Its edges carried a faint polish at 3 points as though it had once fitted into a circular opening. Rebecca examined the workbench itself. The drawer cavity was dark. She held the lamp near it and saw a cedar-colored circle set into the rear rail, almost invisible against the maple shadow. The opening was 3 inches wide. She inserted the disc. It fitted exactly. When she turned it clockwise, resistance gathered beneath her fingers. A wooden mechanism moved somewhere behind the bench with a dry internal click. The rear board inside the empty drawer loosened. Rebecca withdrew the drawer and tipped it forward. The false back slid 1/2 inch, revealing a narrow finger gap. She stopped. The lamp flame moved in the draft from the vent. Outside, snow had begun falling again, ticking softly against the wall timbers. The stove held one small fire. Water warmed in the saucepan. Every ordinary object in the cottage remained where she had placed it. Rebecca drew the false panel free. Behind it lay a space extending the width of the drawer and nearly 2 feet into the body of the bench. The compartment had been lined with cedar. Inside were 4 parcels wrapped in oilcloth, a long bundle tied with linen tape, and a square tin box sealed around its edge with dark wax. Rebecca touched none of them for several minutes. She looked first for dampness. The cedar lining was dry. The oilcloth had stiffened but not cracked. No mouse droppings or insect damage appeared inside the compartment. She carried each parcel to the table in the front room. The first weighed perhaps 3 pounds. The second was lighter. The third produced a soft, metallic shift when lifted. The fourth was flat and broad, its wrapping folded with exact corners. The long bundle was shaped like a tool roll. The tin box made no sound. Rebecca closed the workroom door to reduce the draft, added 1 split of maple to the stove, and washed her hands in warmed water. Soot remained beneath her nails, but she scrubbed until no dirt marked the towel. She opened the long bundle first. The linen tape had been tied in a square knot. She loosened it, rather than cutting it, and unfolded the oilcloth 1 layer at a time. Inside lay 6 tools. A small, brass-faced hammer. A set of warding files wrapped in wool. A hand vise with jaws lined in leather. A steel key gauge engraved in 32 measurements. A spring winder. A pair of dividers finer than those hanging above the bench. Each tool had been cleaned, oiled, and prepared for storage. The hammer's handle bore the carved symbol of a key crossing an open doorway. Rebecca lifted the key gauge. Along one edge, in letters barely taller than a grain of rice, was engraved Bellweather Lock-and-Latch Workcest, 1841. The first parcel contained raw brass blanks, but these were different from those in the drawer. Each had been hand-forged, filed square, and stamped with a number. Some were broad enough for early rim locks. Others had long, narrow bows suited to desks, trunks, or cabinets. The second parcel held sheets of brass and thin spring steel separated by waxed paper. The third contained finished keys. There were 47. They ranged from plain iron bit keys to intricate brass safe keys, cabinet keys with hollow barrels, church keys with clover-shaped bows, and 1 tiny silver key no longer than Rebecca's smallest finger. Each had a paper tag attached by thread. The tags did not name locks, they named people. Miriam Cole, 1867. Thomas Reed, 1879. Elias Bell, 1894. Anna Crowell, 1918. Joseph Pike, 1933. Elsie Moore, 1952. Arthur Bell, 1961. The final tag had no key attached. Samuel Hayes, 1981. Rebecca laid the finished keys in a row upon the table. 47 pieces of metal, 47 names, 47 promises made exact. She opened the flat parcel. Photographs lay between sheets of black paper. The earliest were tintypes, their surfaces dark until tilted toward the lamp. They showed men and women before the cottage, some standing alone, some in pairs, some with children. Clothing changed across the images, skirts narrowed, collars softened, boots gave way to shoes. A horse and wagon appeared in one photograph, an early automobile in another, then a pickup truck with rounded fenders. The cottage remained behind them. The walnut trees grew from thin saplings into broad-limbed shade. Rebecca turned each photograph carefully. Names and dates had been written on the backs. Abigail Morse, arrived February 12, 1849. Henry and Louisa Bell, winter of 1863. Miriam Cole, after the flood, April 1867. Thomas Reed, discharged and walking home, November 1879. Rose Bell, with infant, January 1901. James Carter, no family located, March 1919. Elsie Moore, found on Route 12, December 1952. Arthur Bell, age 13, February 1961. Rebecca held Arthur's photograph near the lamp. He stood on the cottage porch wearing a coat several sizes too large. Snow reached the lower step. His face was narrow even then, his expression guarded, and his left hand rested against the door as though prepared to hold it closed. Beside him stood an elderly woman in a dark wool dress. On the back, below the date, someone had written, "Stayed 11 months. Learned to sleep through wind." Rebecca returned the photograph to its place. Samuel's image came near the end. He stood beneath the Bellweather sign in autumn, carrying a leather tool case. His hair was still dark. The green-shaded lamp from his workshop rested on the porch railing beside him. The date was October 4th, 1981. On the back, in Samuel's handwriting, were 7 words: "Lock restored. Promise remains sound. Key retained." Rebecca looked toward the iron key beside the stove. The final photograph had been taken in summer. Arthur, older now, stood with Marion Pike, Walter Crowell, Doris Vale, Evelyn Harrow, and 3 people Rebecca did not recognize. They were not posed closely. Each held some tool or household object: a hammer, broom, coffee tin, folded blanket, ledger, coil of rope. The date was June 1997. Beneath it, "Those keeping the Way House this season." Rebecca placed the photographs back between the black sheets and folded the oilcloth around them. Only the tin box remained. Its lid had been sealed with wax at 4 points. The metal was dull gray, with a brass clasp and no lock. On top, someone had scratched the same doorway symbol. Rebecca warmed the tip of the kitchen knife over the lamp and used it to soften the wax. She worked slowly, lifting each seal intact where possible. The clasp opened with a faint snap. Inside lay a folded letter tied with blue thread. Beneath it were coins. Rebecca did not remove the letter. Not yet. She carried the tin box to the workbench and cleared the surface. Then she brought the lamp closer and began lifting the coins one at a time. She arranged them by denomination: $20 Liberty Head gold pieces, $10 Indian Head eagles, $5 half eagles, silver Morgan dollars, their edges worn smooth from circulation, walking Liberty half dollars, standing Liberty quarters, Barber dimes, Mercury dimes, Buffalo nickels, Indian Head cents. Several foreign coins rested in a separate cloth purse: a British sovereign dated 1893, 2 Canadian 50-cent pieces, a French 5-franc coin, and a Norwegian krone pierced near the rim. Rebecca used the balance scale from the workbench to compare suspicious pieces, though nothing suggested they were false. She wrote every date, mint mark, and denomination on paper before adding the values. The gold alone came to $480 in face value. The silver and smaller coins added $163.42. At the bottom of the box lay a cotton bank pouch secured with twine. Inside were folded United States notes, some large in format, their paper softened but intact. Rebecca flattened each beneath clean glass from a picture frame. There were 2 $20 gold certificates. 6 $10 silver certificates, 9 $5 United States notes, 11 $2 notes, and a single $1 bill dated 1923. The paper currency totaled $168. Combined with the coins, the cashie held $811.42 in face value. Rebecca counted again, then a third time. The amount did not include whatever collectors might pay for the gold, dates, mint marks, or preserved notes. She did not know those values and did not guess. $811.42 had been hidden inside the bench. More than 4 times the amount she had carried from Rutland. Enough to rent a room for months. Enough to buy roofing materials. Enough to take the bus anywhere the roads reached. Rebecca wrote the total at the bottom of the page. $811.42. Beneath the bank pouch lay one final object wrapped in a faded handkerchief. She unfolded it. A bronze military medal rested inside. The ribbon had once been blue but had faded toward gray. The medal bore an eagle above crossed rifles and the words, United States Volunteers. Along the reverse, a name had been engraved by hand. Elias Bell Company, D13th Vermont Infantry, 1862. A smaller line below gave a date, July 3, 1863. Rebecca knew enough history to recognize Gettysburg. She held the medal by its edges and returned it to the handkerchief. The letter remained tied. Its paper had yellowed along the folds. Blue thread crossed it twice and fastened at the back with a plain knot. On the outer page, written in dark brown ink, were 4 words. For the next keeper. Rebecca sat at the workbench. The cottage had grown fully dark around her. Firelight moved across the tools, the cedar disc, the rows of coins, and Samuel's walnut-handled file. Snow collected against the lower window covering and softened every sound from the clearing. She could open the letter. The knot would release beneath one pull. The paper had waited long enough to survive another careful unfolding. Every object around it seemed arranged toward that act. Rebecca did not touch the thread. Knowledge, Samuel had taught her, could damage a mechanism when forced before its parts were understood. She returned the coins to the tin box in their separate groups. She wrapped the medal. She placed the photographs and tools beside the box, but did not reseal the hidden compartment. Then she took the letter to the front room and laid it on the table beneath the iron candlestick. The stove had burned low. Rebecca put on her coat, opened the front door, and stepped into the night. Snow had stopped again. Clouds had parted above the ridge, revealing a narrow field of stars. The clearing shone faintly where moonlight touched the unbroken surface. Each walnut branch held a white line along its upper edge. Rebecca walked to the creek. She carried no lantern. The snow reflected enough light for her to follow the path. At the bank, she crouched beside the opening she had broken through the ice that morning. Water moved beneath her. It passed over stones older than the cottage, carrying fragments of moonlight under the frozen edges. The sound was neither urgent nor still. It continued because the land descended and because water had found a way through. Rebecca watched until her knees began to ache from the cold. She considered the people named on the keys. Those found after floods, wars, lost work, winter roads, and unrecorded griefs. They had slept in the same rooms. They had warmed their hands over earlier stoves, carried buckets from the creek, listened to the same timbers tighten after sunset. Someone had left them coffee. Someone had repaired the roof. Someone had kept the key. Rebecca placed one gloved hand on the ice near the water, feeling the current as a faint vibration through its surface. Inside the cottage, a letter waited beneath a candlestick. She did not need to read it that night. For once, waiting did not mean being refused. The house had been waiting. Morning entered the cottage by degrees. First came a gray line beneath the door, then a diluted brightness through the surviving window, then the faint blue of snow reflected onto the ceiling beams. The stove had gone cold. Frost feathered the inside of the glass and gathered along the nail heads in the temporary window covering. Rebecca rose before the room had fully taken shape. The letter remained beneath the iron candlestick. She carried creek water inside, warmed it, and washed her face and hands with deliberate care. She brushed soot from the workbench, wiped the table with a damp cloth, and laid Samuel's walnut-handled file beside the sealed tin box. Only then did she sit. The blue thread loosened without resistance. Rebecca unfolded the outer page and saw the handwriting beneath. The first letters were narrow and upright. The lower loops leaned slightly left. Each capital had been formed with the same careful pressure she had seen on old repair tags in Samuel's workshop. Not Samuel's hand, but near enough to make the recognition physical. Someone had taught him, or someone had taught the person who taught him. The ink had browned with age, yet the strokes remained exact. At the top of the first page, written without title or date, were the words, "My dear one, whoever you are." Rebecca drew the lamp closer and began to read. "My dear one, whoever you are, I am writing because Dr. Nathaniel Ward of Burlington has told me that the illness in my lungs will not be turned by another winter. He was kind enough to speak plainly when I asked him, and I am grateful for plain speech. I have perhaps 6 months, perhaps fewer. The date today is August 17th, 1903, and the rain has been steady since dawn. You may be kin to me, you may not. That distinction has mattered less in this house than it has in most places. The first Bell to keep this cottage was Josiah Bell, born near Hexham in Northumberland in 1798. He came to Vermont in 1823 with his wife, Ruth Fenwick Bell, whose family had worked iron near the Tyne. Josiah repaired wagon locks and barn latches until enough neighbors asked for his help that he built the first bench here in 1841. Their son, Elias Bell, born in 1829, learned the trade and enlarged it. He made locks for schoolhouses, mills, meeting houses, and the homes of people who could pay. For those who could not, he accepted flour, lamp oil, apples, mended coats, and once a milk cow that kicked him every morning for 7 years. Elias married Miriam Cole in 1856. Their daughter, Abigail Bell, was born here in 1862, while Elias was away with Company D of the 13th Vermont Infantry. He returned after the war with a wound below the ribs and a silence no physician could measure. Abigail was my mother. I am Rose Bell Hayes, born October 9th, 1878, in the back room of this cottage during the first snow of that year. I married Daniel Hayes of Bristol in 1899. Our son Samuel was born in 1901. If you carry the Hayes name, perhaps you are descended from him. If you do not, then another road brought you here, and that road is no less worthy of being remembered. The trade ended on March 11th, 1870. That morning, the east workshop caught fire after a cracked lamp reservoir leaked onto a bench rag. The flame took the roof before the snow could be shoveled through the windows. 3 finished locks, the forge bellows, 20 years of pattern books, and most of Elias's specialized tools were lost before noon. No one died. Still, something closed. Elias rebuilt the cottage room by room, but he did not rebuild the forge. His right hand had begun to tremble from the wound and from age. He worked only at the bench after that, repairing what already existed. Abigail learned enough to assist him, but was told the trade was not suitable for a daughter. Those were the words used. For more than 30 years, the tools that survived have remained wrapped and silent. My husband, Daniel, was lost in the Philippines in 1901 while serving with the 26th United States Volunteer Infantry. The telegram said he died of fever near Iloilo. There was no body returned. Our son was 6 months old. My brother Thomas died 2 years later from the effects of a wound received at Santiago during the Spanish-American War. My mother had already gone. My father had been buried beneath the walnut trees. I have learned that a family can become quiet in a single generation. Yet quiet is not the same as ended. The work itself is simple to describe and difficult to perform. Heat brass only until it reaches a dull red in low light, never bright orange, or the grain will weaken. Let it cool in still air unless the piece must be softened, in which case quench it in clean water after annealing. For spring steel, mix 1 part lampblack with 2 parts clean tallow and coat the surface before heating. Temper narrow springs to the color of ripe straw, broader springs to deep gold, and do not trust a color seen in direct sunlight. When fitting a bit key, blacken the blank with lamp smoke, turn it gently in the lock, and file only where the wards have marked it. Remove less than you believe necessary. Test after every 3 strokes. For beeswax polish, warm 4 parts beeswax with 1 part boiled linseed oil. Do not let it smoke. Stir for 12 minutes after the wax has melted, then pour into a shallow tin and cool uncovered. For rusted iron, use vinegar diluted with equal water no longer than 2 hours. Then rinse, dry beside mild heat, and oil at once. Never leave a spring submerged overnight. You will wake to find the metal honest about its weakness. These instructions are not a command. No one should inherit a craft as a burden. What must be inherited is the care behind it. A lock exists because something matters on the other side. Sometimes that is money. Sometimes it is medicine, a letter, a room where a child is sleeping, or the last photograph of someone no longer living. The person who makes the key may never know what is being protected. The work still deserves exactness. This cottage became a way house after the flood of 1849, when Abigail Morse came to the door barefoot and carrying a baby under her shawl. My grandmother gave her the bed and slept beside the stove. Since then, people have been brought here without questions whenever the roads behind them were closed and the roads ahead were not yet visible. No one owns that mercy. We keep it. There is money in the tin box, though less than rumor may someday claim. Use what is required to preserve the roof, the chimney, the well, and the tools. Use it to make the house grand. It has never needed grandeur. The metal belonged to Elias. If a keeper someday has the means, carry it to his grave in Burlington on July 3rd and let it rest there for 1 hour. That is enough. Behind the cottage, the center walnut holds an iron horseshoe within its western fork. Beneath that tree is the stone marking my father's resting place. The name has nearly weathered away. Brush it clean, but do not deepen the letters. If Samuel lives to read this, tell him that I was sorry to leave before he could remember my face. Tell him the walnut-handled file was his grandfather's, and that the bench was built for hands no one had yet imagined. A better question is not who owns this house, but who will keep its promise. Should you be reading this because you have nowhere else to go, sleep first. Eat something warm. Learn the sounds of the rooms, repair only what winter requires, the rest can wait. The house is not empty, it has been waiting. You are welcome here. Rosebell Hayes. Bellweather Way House, August 17th, 1903. Rebecca reached the signature and stopped. The room remained unchanged. The saucepan rested beside the stove. Meltwater had gathered beneath one corner of the roof tarp. The mouse moved once behind the cupboard and became still. Outside, a chickadee made 3 dry notes from the walnut branches. Rebecca read the letter again. The second reading was slower. She paused over the names and dates. She counted 4 generations from Josiah to Samuel. She compared Rose's instructions to those Samuel had given at the maple bench. Test after every 3 strokes. Remove less than you believe necessary. Oil metal at once. Samuel had carried her methods forward without naming their source. Perhaps he had not known the whole of it. Perhaps he had known and believed the house should offer its own account. When Rebecca finished, she folded the pages along their original creases. The paper settled into those lines as though relieved to be returned to an order it remembered. She retied the blue thread with the same square knot and placed the letter beside the tin box. Her hands did not shake. She put on her coat. Behind the cottage, the snow was deeper, where wind had crossed the clearing and gathered along the slope. Rebecca carried a broom, the narrow shovel Arthur kept near the door, and the photograph of Samuel sealed inside its black paper. The center walnut was the largest of the three. Its trunk divided 12 feet above the ground into two broad arms. On the western side, half enclosed by bark, was an iron horseshoe. The tree had grown around its curved ends until only the center and lower rim remained visible. Rebecca touched the metal. It had been placed there when the trunk was young. Beneath the western fork, snow formed a smooth rise over the ground. She began clearing it with the broom, working outward from the tree so the shovel would not strike stone. 6 inches down, the broom caught against a flat surface. Rebecca used her gloves to uncover it. The marker was slate, no higher than her knee, and green with lichen along the upper edge. Its face leaned slightly toward the creek. The lettering had softened beneath weather, but enough remained to read. Elias Bell, 1829 to 1898. He kept the door. No mention of Company D, no mention of Gettysburg. Only the work. Rebecca brushed snow from the base and sat on her heels. Samuel had stood here. Rose had stood here. Arthur, Marion, Walter, Doris, Evelyn, and the unnamed keepers in the photographs had passed beneath these branches with firewood, blankets, food, tools, and perhaps people too weary to carry their own bags. Rebecca placed Samuel's photograph against the marker. In the image, he was young enough to seem almost unfamiliar. Yet the tool case in his hand tilted at the same angle he had always carried it, balanced away from his knee so the files within would not strike one another. "You came back," Rebecca said. The words entered the snow and went no farther. She did not ask why he had withheld the place from her. The dead could not be required to answer, according to the needs of the living. Samuel had left a repaired lock, his mark upon the key, the recovered file, and a route that had remained open longer than he had. That was his answer. Rebecca returned the photograph to its paper and stood. On the way inside, she noticed a square iron hook fixed beneath the porch eave. A glass lantern hung there, its chimney clouded with soot. She had seen it during the inventory but assumed the wick had decayed. Inside, she took it down. The brass burner was green with oxidation. The cotton wick had hardened, yet a fresh coil rested in the back of the cupboard beside the lamp oil Arthur had brought. Rebecca trimmed a new length, threaded it through the burner, and washed the glass in warm water. The lantern itself was older than the cottage photographs taken after 1900. Its base had been cast with a date, 1843. Along one side, someone had scratched a sequence of initials, J, B, E, B, A, B, B, J. The same hands named in the letter. Rebecca filled the reservoir only halfway and let the wick absorb oil while she prepared the room. She carried the letter, the metal, the cedar disc, the walnut-handled file, and the 47 labeled keys to the table. She did not arrange them for display. She placed them as working things, each with enough space to be lifted without disturbing another. Then she lit the lantern. The wick caught low and blue before rising to amber. Light spread through the old glass unevenly, bright in one direction and softened in another. It touched the carved sign visible through the doorway, the brass blanks, the worn table, and the blackened grain of the ceiling beams. The lantern had waited 60 years beyond Rose's death, perhaps longer. Rebecca turned the flame down until it held steady. She warmed beans on the stove and ate slowly. Afterward, she opened the account book and added new entries. 1 loaf, Doris Vale, 40 cents. 2 eggs, unknown giver, 18 cents. Pickled beets, unknown giver, 25 cents. Use of sled, carried forward, chimney tools. Arthur Bell, carried forward, credit, Walter Crowell. $9.78. Wool gloves, June Patel, returned through kindness. She stopped at the final line. The gloves were not yet returned to anyone. June had given them without asking. Maribel had charged for oatmeal and had allowed the coffee to disappear from the receipt. The bus driver had offered the red emergency flag. Marion had stopped on the winter road and left the south stall open. Arthur had packed hot water. Evelyn had kept the county office open after noon. Walter had entered her name into a ledger under the word custodian. Doris had wrapped bread and told her to keep the pages dry. None of these people had rescued her. They had done something more careful. They had removed one obstacle at a time. A hot drink. A ride. A dry floor. A map. A limited account. A door that could still be opened after years of cold. Rebecca looked at the remaining money in her envelope. It was less than before, but she no longer saw it as a distance she could travel. It had become nails, oil, pipe, lamp fuel, and days purchased against April. Outside, the afternoon dimmed. Snow began again, large flakes descending without wind. They settled upon the porch railing and over the path to the walnut tree, softening the evidence of her footsteps while leaving the root beneath them unchanged. There are kindnesses a person remembers because they were grand enough to be named aloud, and there are others so modest they might have passed unnoticed had they arrived on an easier day. Perhaps someone once held a door when your hands were full. Perhaps a teacher kept a classroom open after the final bell. Perhaps a stranger paid for coffee, repaired a tire, offered a blanket, or spoke to you as though your difficult season were not the whole of your life. If such a kindness found you, you may still be carrying it. You may have passed it onward without ever knowing where the first gesture ended and the next began. Rebecca did not know the histories of everyone whose name appeared in the account book. She did not know what had taught June to offer tea without questions, or why Marion kept an empty barn stall dry, or what debt Walter's father believed could be settled only through roofs and tools. She knew only that their choices had reached her. That was enough. Near evening, Rebecca carried the heirlooms into the back room. She did not hide them inside the cedar compartment, not that night. The tin box rested beneath the bed. The letter lay inside the cedar chest, wrapped in its oilcloth and placed above the folded linen. Samuel's file remained on the washstand beside the iron key. The military medal, still protected by the faded handkerchief, rested within reach of her pillow. She extinguished the front room lantern, but left the stove fire small and steady until the iron warmed. Then she returned to the bed. The rope supports gave softly beneath her weight. Wind passed over the roof and pressed against the patched window covering, but the sound no longer seemed like a warning. It was simply weather meeting work not yet completed. Rebecca placed one hand on the edge of the tin box beneath the bed. For the first time, she understood that inheritance did not always arrive through law, blood, or the orderly distribution of possessions. Sometimes it arrived as a task kept unfinished for the right pair of hands. She closed her eyes with the medal beside her and Rose's welcome resting in the cedar chest. Before sleep, Rebecca heard snow slide from the southern roof and fall heavily into the yard. The cottage held. The first measured snow of Rebecca's ownership fell on December 7th. Walter's store thermometer showed 21 degrees at noon. By dusk, 9 inches had settled over the clearing, burying the lower porch step and rounding the broken roofline until the damage looked gentler than it was. Rebecca did not trust gentleness created by snow. She read the roofing chapter 3 times. The first reading gave her terms: common rafter, collar tie, sheathing, drip edge, headlap, exposure. The second gave her sequence. The third gave her enough caution to understand where a printed page ended and a roof began. She measured the northern slope from the attic opening with a folding rule Arthur brought from the county records room. The damaged section ran 12 feet from ridge to eave and nearly 9 feet across. 2 rafters were split beneath the fallen beech limb. 3 sheathing boards had broken. Another 5 had softened where water entered around the puncture. Rebecca drew the roof on brown paper. She calculated 84 square feet of damaged surface, then added 15% for trimming and loss. Walter checked her figures at the hardware counter without changing them. 97 square feet, she said. Round to 100. For safety? For crooked buildings. The replacement list filled half a ledger page. 120 cedar shingles, 16 inches long. 1 roll of 30-pound roofing felt. 4 pounds of 5-penny hot-dipped galvanized shingle nails. 16 linear feet of 1x6 pine sheathing. 2 sister rafters. Full dimension 2x6, 14 feet long. 1 bundle of cedar shims. 1 pound of 8-penny common nails. 2 tubes of cold weather roof cement for the temporary ridge seal. The cedar shingles cost $11.40. Felt cost $3.85. Nails, $1.12. Pine boards, $4.60. The 2 rafters cost $5.20 after Walter rejected 1 board for a hidden knot near the center. Rebecca signed every line. Her account rose beyond the original limit. Walter read the total, drew 1 straight mark through the number 25 at the top of the page and wrote 40 beneath it. You said the limit was fixed. I said it was limited. That is not the same. No. From beneath the counter, he brought out a roofing hatchet. Its head was narrow, with a square hammer face on one side and a thin blade on the other. Nail slots had been cut into the steel. The hickory handle had darkened almost black from use. My father's, Walter said. He died before the hardware store learned how to sell tools people did not need. Rebecca did not reach for it. I cannot buy that. You cannot. Then I should not take it. Walter laid the hatchet across the open manual. A roof does not care about your manners. The first skilled man to climb into the attic was Gideon Shaw. He arrived the following morning carrying a canvas tool roll and wearing a navy watch cap pulled low above white eyebrows. He had been a roofer for 42 years, most of them before synthetic underlayment and pneumatic nailers. His back had bent permanently toward the work. Even indoors, he stood as though measuring pitch. Arthur introduced him and left. Gideon inspected the split rafters from below. He pressed the point of an awl into the timber, tested the surrounding grain, and looked through the opening toward the snow. Beech limb came down in October. Nobody gave me the date. October 26. How do you know? I heard it. He said nothing else for several minutes. Rebecca followed him onto the porch roof where he examined the cedar shingles around the break. Some were sound despite their age, others fractured when lifted. I cannot pay a roofer, she said. Good. Gideon pushed the awl into his tool roll. I am retired. That still leaves the work. The work is why I came. He would accept coffee, bread, and the right to leave whenever his knees required it. Nothing more. They began by cutting the beech limb into manageable lengths with a bow saw. Gideon tied each section before Rebecca severed it, controlling the fall so no additional shingles broke. The largest piece took 2 hours to remove. Its wet wood smelled faintly sweet beneath the bark. The sister rafters went in from below. Rebecca cleared the old insulation and exposed the damaged members from ridge to plate. Gideon showed her how to plane the new lumber, where the hand-hewn original varied in thickness. Each sister was fitted tightly beside the split timber, supported first by temporary blocking, then secured with staggered 8-penny nails driven every 16 inches. Not in one line, Gideon said. Why? Wood splits along permission. They placed the nails in a staggered pattern. Gideon drove each with 3 strokes. The first set the point. The second carried the nail nearly home. The third seated the head flush. Rebecca required 5 strokes, then 4. By the end of the second day, she could do it in 3 when the grain was straight. On the third morning, Gideon pointed to a nail she had driven too shallow. That nail's proud. Rebecca touched the head. Pull it. She did. He did not allow her to hammer it farther. A bent shank hidden below the surface could split the board during freeze and thaw. They replaced the broken sheathing on days 4 and 5. Rebecca cut each pine board with the hand saw from Crowell Hardware, leaving an 1/8-inch gap between edges for seasonal movement. Gideon checked only the first 2. After that, he listened to the cuts. The roofing felt went down on day 6. They began at the eave and worked upward, overlapping each course by 2 inches and each end joint by 6. Rebecca fastened it with just enough nails to hold beneath the shingles. Gideon warned her that felt was not the roof. It was only the final patience beneath it. He snapped the chalk line himself. Blue powder marked each course across the black paper. The lines were exact even where the roof was not. The cedar shingles required spacing. 1/4 inch between pieces for swelling. 5 inches of exposure. Joints offset at least 1.5 inches between courses. No joint allowed to fall directly above another in the next 2 rows. Rebecca kept a wooden gauge in her coat pocket. At first, she checked every shingle. Later, her fingers learned the distance. The weather remained in the 20s during daylight and dropped below 10 at night. They worked until their gloves stiffened, then warmed their hands around enamel cups in the front room. Gideon drank his coffee without sugar and never sat in the better chair. On day 8, wind rose from the west. Gideon watched snow lift from the walnut branches. Down. They left the roof without debate. For 3 hours, wind drove loose snow through the opening they had not yet closed. Rebecca fastened canvas beneath the rafters and placed 3 pots under the melt. Gideon sharpened Walter's roofing hatchet beside the stove, drawing the blade across a stone in slow circles. He returned it without comment. On day 9, they resumed. On day 10, the new cedar reached the ridge. On day 11, December 18th, Rebecca installed the final shingle beneath Gideon's hand resting lightly against the ladder. The repaired section was paler than the surrounding roof. It did not pretend to be original. The courses lay straight, the ridge held beneath a temporary cap, and no daylight entered the attic. Rebecca descended. Gideon looked upward for a long while. "Will it hold?" she asked. "Nothing holds forever." He placed the chalk reel inside his tool roll. "This will hold honestly." That night, snow began at 9. Rebecca sat beneath the repaired slope and listened. No drip entered the pan. No wet line appeared along the rafter. The roof carried the weight in silence. The chimney worsened after Christmas. A warm rain entered the upper joints on December 29th. 2 nights later, the temperature fell to 6 below zero. When Rebecca climbed into the attic on New Year's morning, she found red dust scattered across the hearthstone and 3 fresh brick faces broken away above the ridge. Spalling, the manual called it. Water entered the porous brick, froze, expanded, and separated the outer surface from the body. The damaged pieces could not be restored by pressing mortar around them. They had to be removed and replaced. Walter found 24 salvaged, hard-fired bricks behind the hardware store. They came from the old creamery boiler room, he said. Dense enough for weather, not fire brick. Rebecca tapped 2 together. The sound was clear. Price, 10 cents each. She bought 16. For the chimney joints below the crown, Gideon recommended hydraulic lime rather than ordinary Portland cement. A hard, modern mortar could trap moisture and break the softer, historic brick. Walter measured the dry mixture into paper sacks. 2 parts washed sand, 1 part natural hydraulic lime, 1/4 part fire clay for the upper flue repair. For interior joints nearest heat, the ratio changed to 3 parts sharp sand, 1 part hydraulic lime, and 1 part fire clay by volume. Rebecca wrote both formulas inside the manual cover. She began January 4th. The daytime temperature seldom rose above 28 degrees. Mortar could not be allowed to freeze before setting, so Rebecca worked in narrow intervals when the chimney surface warmed beneath weak sun. She built a canvas shelter round the upper stack and heated bricks inside the cottage before carrying them onto the roof one at a time. Each brick was warm, never hot. She raked failed mortar from the joints to a depth of 3/4 of an inch using a narrow plugging chisel. Powder fell into a sheet spread across the shingles. Sound mortar remained. She did not deepen the joint merely to make it uniform. Gideon checked the first course, wet the brick. Rebecca brushed water onto the joint. Not drowning it, she waited until the surface darkened without shining. The mortar had to be stiff enough to hold on the trowel when turned sideways. Too much water weakened the cure. Too little prevented the lime from bedding into the pores. Rebecca mixed only what she could use in 20 minutes. She packed the deepest joints in 2 lifts, pressing mortar firmly with a narrow pointing key. The final surface was tooled slightly concave to shed water. Each repaired section was covered with damp burlap, then canvas, then a wool blanket during the coldest hours. Her bare hands went numb every 15 minutes. Gloves reduced the feel she needed at the joint. She worked barehanded until the fingertips lost precision, then descended, held them near the stove without touching the iron, and waited for pain to return. Pain meant circulation. Gideon gave no praise. He watched her remake a joint that had sagged. "Too wet," he said. Rebecca scraped it out. On January 11th, she removed the first spalled brick. She drilled the surrounding mortar by hand, loosened the unit without damaging its neighbors, and slid it free. The center had remained sound, though the face had broken away in thin shells. She carried it inside and set it near the workbench. Not every failed piece needed throwing away. The replacement brick was slightly taller. Rebecca rubbed its lower bed against a sandstone block until the dimensions matched. She checked the face against a string line stretched along the chimney wall. Gideon watched. Closer. She removed another 1/16 of an inch. Now, they completed the exterior work over 3 weeks. The chimney crown received a sloped lime cap that projected beyond the brick faces. Rebecca reset the metal rain cap and replaced its corroded fasteners. Inside, she repaired 2 open joints in the smoke chamber using the fire clay mixture, applying it in compact layers with a gloved hand. On January 27th, they performed the test fire. The air outside measured 19 degrees. Rebecca warmed the flue first with rolled newspaper held near the throat. When the draft turned upward, she added dry kindling, then 1 narrow split of maple. Gideon stood outside with Arthur, watching the cap. The stove pipe ticked. The fire strengthened. No smoke entered the room. Rebecca added a second split after 20 minutes. The flames remained bright rather than smoldering. At the chimney top, smoke rose in a clean, pale thread before disappearing against the sky. Arthur came inside first. "Straight up," he said. Gideon followed and held one hand near the repaired joints. No heat where it should not be. Rebecca looked toward the ceiling. The pipe carried its sound steadily through the wall thimble. The chimney had not become new. It had become trustworthy. The floor waited until the chimney was safe. Rebecca began in the front room, where white pine planks ran from east to west in widths ranging from 9 to 14 inches. The broadest boards had been cut from trees large enough that the growth rings lay nearly straight across their faces. Most were sound. Their damage came from paint, soot, ground-in grit, and water staining beneath the broken roof. Several hand-cut rose-head nails had risen above the surface. Their square shoulders caught cloth and boot soles. Rebecca reset them with a nail set, never driving the forged heads beneath the wood. Walter rented her a random orbit sander for $14 a day. "It is not patient," he said. "You must be." He included a canvas dust bag, a box of abrasive discs, and an extension cord long enough to reach Marion Pike's portable generator. Marion hauled the generator to the lower road on a sled. Arthur and Rebecca pulled it the remaining distance. The machine sat outside beneath a temporary lean-to, its engine turning the clearing's stillness into a low mechanical thrum. Rebecca sanded in 3 passes. 80 grit first. It removed paint, shallow scratches, and the gray surface left by years without finish. She moved with the grain, keeping the sander in constant motion so it would not carve hollows into the soft pine. The first pass exposed differences among the boards. Some turned pale gold. Others revealed amber streaks around knots. The planks nearest the stove carried dark mineral stains that no sanding could remove without taking too much wood. Rebecca left them. The house had earned its marks. The second pass used 120 grit. It softened the scratches left by the coarser paper and leveled the edges where boards had curled slightly. The final pass used 220. Walter called it unnecessary. Rebecca used it only on the workbench room and the boards around the bed, where bare feet might travel. Dust entered everything. She sealed the cupboard doors with cloth, covered the stove, and wore a kerchief over her mouth. Even so, fine pine powder settled along her eyebrows and inside the folds of her sleeves. At night, the room smelled newly cut. For the finish, she tested both boiled linseed oil and pure tung oil on the underside of a loose threshold board. Linseed warmed the grain quickly, but remained tacky in the cold. Tung oil penetrated more slowly and resisted water better. She chose a mixture. 2 parts pure tung oil, 1 part citrus solvent for the first coat. The second coat used 3 parts oil to 1 part solvent. The final coat was nearly pure. She warmed each mixture in a pan of hot water, never over direct flame. Using folded linen, she applied thin coats until the wood would absorb no more, then wiped away every shining patch after 30 minutes. Excess oil would wrinkle. Oily cloth could ignite. Rebecca spread each used rag flat on a line outside until fully cured, then stored it in a covered metal pail. The floor changed over 6 days. The first coat turned the pale pine to dark honey. The second drew deeper color from the oldest boards. By the third, the grain around the stove had darkened toward mahogany, though the wood itself remained pine. Each coat cured for 48 hours. During that time, Rebecca walked along boards laid across the room like narrow bridges. She ate near the back door and slept in the workroom. One morning, she did not begin. She had risen before dawn after sleeping poorly. Her wrists hurt from the sander. A blister beneath her right thumb had opened during the final oiling. The room smelled of solvent despite the cracked window, and the list on the wall seemed to lengthen each time she looked away. Rebecca put on her coat and walked beyond the creek. The marsh lay half a mile downhill, where the water widened among alder and sedge. Snow covered most of it, but a dark channel remained open near the center. A great blue heron stood there. It seemed too large for January, its body gathered into itself, one leg hidden, the long neck folded until the head rested close to the shoulders. It did not hunt. It did not leave. Rebecca sat on a fallen log and watched. Wind moved through the dry reeds with the sound of paper being handled in another room. The heron shifted once, placing one narrow foot into the black water, then became still again. Rebecca remained until noon. She did not sand. She did not oil. She did not write an apology in the account book. When she returned, the cottage had not failed because she had left it alone for a morning. The finish continued curing, so did she. There were 8 windows. 3 had no glass, 4 retained cracked panes. One in the eastern wall of the workroom held its original glass from 1788. Arthur found the date in an assessor's survey older than the county annex. The cottage had begun as a narrower structure before the Bell family enlarged it. The eastern sash remained from that first building. Its glass was thin, green at the edges, and full of small waves. An oval bubble rested near the lower corner. Rebecca would not replace it. She removed each damaged sash one at a time and carried it to the workbench. Layers of paint concealed the joints. Old glazing putty had hardened into gray ridges that broke beneath the point of a knife. Walter supplied DAP 33 glazing compound in a white tub. "Keep it warm," he said. Rebecca stored it near the stove, far enough that the oil would not separate. She removed loose putty with a stiff knife, working parallel to the glass so pressure would not crack the remaining pane. Where putty resisted, she warmed it with a cloth soaked in hot water rather than using an open flame. The old glazing points were triangular and rusted. She saved those that remained sound. For replacement glass, Walter cut panes 1/8 inch smaller than each opening to allow seasonal movement. Rebecca bedded each pane in a thin rope of putty pressed into the rabbet, then set the glass gently and installed points every 6 to 8 inches. The final putty line required patience. She rolled the compound between her palms, pressed it along the edge, and drew the knife in one continuous stroke, forming a clean bevel that met the sight line on the inside. Her first corner tore. She removed it and began again. By the fourth sash, the bevels lay smooth. The counterweight cords had failed in 6 windows. Rebecca bought 1/4-inch braided cotton sash cord. She opened the weight pockets, vacuumed decades of dust with Walter's hand bellows, and lifted the cast-iron weights from inside the wall. Each cord passed over a pulley and tied to the counterweight with a figure-8 knot. The knot tightened under load, but could be removed later without cutting. Arthur held the sash while Rebecca tested the first repair. It rose. At halfway, it remained. "Balanced," he said. Rebecca lowered it. The second window required a heavier weight on one side because the replacement glass was thicker. Walter found a small cast-iron washer that brought the balance within 2 ounces. The cracked panes that could survive were repaired rather than discarded. Rebecca cleaned each line, applied a narrow bead of clear conservation adhesive, and left the irregular crack visible. A repaired window did not need to deny that it had broken. The original 1788 sash came last. Rebecca removed no glass from it. She cleaned the putty with a soft brush and replaced only 3 failed sections. The wood beneath the paint was eastern white pine, tight-grained and nearly free of knots. She freed the pulley, installed new cotton cord, and rehung the sash using the original screws. Outside, afternoon light had begun to turn blue across the snow. A chickadee landed on the nearest walnut branch. It faced the window, black cap lowered, small body lifting with each breath. Rebecca held the sash halfway open while the bird picked at a seam in the bark. Cold air entered the workroom. It carried the scent of snow, wet wood, and distant chimney smoke from the road below. The chickadee moved closer. For several seconds, bird and woman remained separated only by the old green glass and the space above the raised sash. Then it flew toward the creek. Rebecca lowered the window. The counterweights descended inside the wall with a soft, even sound. The sash met the sill without striking it. No draft moved around the frame. She rested her palm on the hand-worn rail. 8 windows now admitted light. Not evenly, not without scars, but enough. The plaster failed in 3 places near the chimney. One patch had fallen before Rebecca arrived, exposing the hand-split oak lath beneath. A second bulged outward above the mantel, held only by strands of horsehair and the rough keys that had once pressed through the narrow gaps. The third gave way on February 22nd when a thaw loosened damp material along the western wall. It fell without warning. Rebecca was carrying ashes toward the door when the plaster released in one broad piece and broke across the floor. Dust rose around the stove. Pale strands of hair showed within the fragments, some curled, some nearly straight, all preserved in lime for more than a century. She gathered every piece into a shallow box. The original lath remained sound. Each strip had been split rather than sawn, leaving a fibrous surface that held plaster better than smooth modern wood. They varied in width and had been fastened with narrow-cut nails. Rebecca replaced only 2 pieces, shaping new oak with the draw knife until their thickness matched. Walter found a paper sack of horsehair in the loft above his store. "My father bought it in the 1950s, he said, for a church ceiling that decided to remain attached. The hair smelled faintly of dust and lanolin. Rebecca washed it in warm water with a little soap, rinsed it twice, and spread it across burlap near the stove. Her plaster mix began with mature lime putty. 3 parts washed sharp sand, 1 part lime putty. Horsehair added by handful, teased apart until the strands distributed evenly without gathering into knots. For the scratch coat, she dampened the lath with a broad brush. Dry oak would pull water too quickly from the plaster and weaken the bond. She pressed the mixture through the gaps until it curled behind the lath, forming keys. The first coat reached roughly 3/8 of an inch. Before it hardened, she scored it with crossing lines made by a notched scrap of wood. The wall looked wounded. Rebecca covered it with damp linen and misted it morning and evening. 3 days later, she applied the brown coat. This layer was also 3/8 of an inch, leveled with a wooden derby rather than polished smooth. It needed enough texture for the finish coat to hold. Rebecca worked from the edges inward, blending the repair into the surviving wall without cutting away more original material than necessary. The brown coat cured for 72 hours. During the first night, the temperature outside fell to 14 degrees. Rebecca kept the stove small but steady, protecting the plaster from freezing while avoiding heat strong enough to dry the surface too quickly. The finish coat was 1/8 of an inch. 1 part fine sand, 1 part screened lime putty. No horsehair. Rebecca applied it with a steel trowel in thin passes, allowing the wall's slight undulations to remain. A perfectly flat repair would have looked more foreign than a careful imperfection. When the lime began to firm, she brushed the surface with a damp, soft-haired brush. The repair lightened as it cured, first gray, then cream. The 3 patches remained visible. They were not failures. They were dates in the life of the wall. Rebecca stood near the mantel and laid her palm against the largest one. It felt cool and faintly damp beneath the surface, still drawing carbon from the air as the lime hardened. These patches will hold another 100 years. She spoke softly, not as a promise she controlled, but as a measure of the care she had given them. Behind her, the stove made a low iron sound. The wall held. Doris Vale began leaving paper bags on the porch every Tuesday. She never knocked. Rebecca learned the time by the sound of a car door below the clearing, then the slow approach of boots along the packed road. By the time she opened the cottage door, Doris was usually halfway back to the trees. The bags varied. One held 2 biscuits wrapped in wax paper, a jar of chicken broth, and the end piece of a ham. Another contained rye bread, 3 onions, and 6 molasses cookies arranged in a tobacco tin so they would not break. Once, during the coldest week of February, Doris left a whole apple pie with 1 slice missing. A note rested beneath it. Quality tested. Rebecca carried the account book to the cafe after the 3rd delivery. Doris stood behind the counter rolling dough. The room smelled of coffee, fried potatoes, and yeast. 4 men in work coats occupied the window table, speaking quietly over bowls of stew. Rebecca placed the ledger near the flour bin. "I owe you $4.86. Doris continued rolling. "No. It is written here. That is not the same as owing. You said to keep accounts. I did not say accounts were money." Rebecca waited. Doris lifted the rolling pin and turned the dough 1/4 turn. When the shop reopens, you can pay me in candles. What shop? The one your hands are already cleaning. I have not decided to reopen anything. Doris dusted the dough with flour. In candles, then. Locks do not make candles. People who keep old houses need more than one skill. Doris cut the dough into circles. Rebecca looked at the ledger. How many candles? As many as $4.86 buys when the time comes. She refused further discussion. The paper bags continued appearing. Caleb Pike arrived on a blue Schwinn bicycle despite the snow. He was 15, narrow-shouldered, and taller than his winter coat allowed. The bicycle tires had been wrapped with lengths of chain for traction. A splitting maul lay across the rear rack, tied with baling twine. Rebecca heard the metal links before she saw him. He pushed the bicycle up the final slope, breathing hard but pretending otherwise. Dark hair escaped beneath a knitted cap. A patch on one knee of his trousers had been sewn with thread several shades too light. My mother said you need wood split. I have an axe. That is not a maul. He leaned the bicycle against the porch. Rebecca looked toward the clearing. There were 3 unsplit rounds near the wood pile and another dozen beneath the beech limb removed from the roof. I cannot pay you. Caleb untied the maul. My mother said, What did she say? About your grandfather? Samuel was not my grandfather. Caleb considered this. She said that was not the important part. He set the first round on a stump. His technique was rough, but strong. He lifted the maul too far behind his head and let the handle slide through his hands too early. The first strike glanced from the grain. Rebecca moved the round. Follow the split from the edge. I know. Then do it. He tried again. The round opened. They worked together until noon. Rebecca steadied crooked pieces with a second length of wood rather than her foot. Caleb learned to read the radial cracks. When the largest beech round resisted, they drove 2 iron wedges into opposite sides until it separated with a sound like a branch breaking high above them. Doris's bread and broth became lunch. Caleb ate 3 slices and said almost nothing. Afterward, he noticed the workbench. He stood in the doorway, holding the final crust in one hand. What is that tool? A key gauge. What does it measure? Depths and widths. Can you make a key? Yes. Any key? No. He looked disappointed. Rebecca lifted a brass blank and showed him how a bit key interacted with wards inside a lock. She blackened the blank over the lamp, inserted it into a practice mechanism Samuel had once given her, and turned it lightly. Small soot marks appeared. Caleb leaned closer. You file there. Only there. How many strokes? 3 before testing. He stayed another hour. Before leaving, Rebecca offered him 75 cents from the remaining cash. He shook his head. My mother said no. Your mother cannot decide what your labor is worth. No. But she can decide what happens if I take it. He pushed the Schwinn toward the road. The chain-wrapped tires made a careful metallic rhythm down the hill. Reverend Boyd never entered the cottage during those months. He walked past every morning except Sunday, though he was the minister at Granville Community Church, and Sunday might have been the day he had least time to spare. He was a tall man with a narrow black overcoat and a dark felt hat. His beard was white beneath the chin and brown near the mouth from years of pipe smoke, though Rebecca never saw him carrying a pipe. The former settlement road did not lead to the church. When she asked Arthur why the Reverend passed each day, Arthur said, he prefers walking where prayer has work to do. Reverend Boyd did not ask Rebecca to attend services. He did not leave pamphlets. He tipped his hat if she was outside and continued toward the upper wall. Sometimes he carried a walking stick, sometimes a paper parcel. Once he left a jar of honey on the porch without stopping. On a morning near the end of February, Rebecca was resetting stones along the foundation when he paused. Snow had begun melting from the southern roof, falling in steady drops beside them. "You are keeping well," he said. "I am trying." He looked at the repaired chimney. "Trying has visible joints." Rebecca waited. He removed his hat. "Keep her through winter." 4 words. His head remained bowed only a moment. Then he replaced the hat and continued uphill. Rebecca watched until the trees received him. The next morning, his footprints appeared in the same place. Rebecca postponed the cellar until February 11th. The hatch lay beneath the rolled rug near the back wall. 2 iron rings had been recessed into the floorboards, nearly invisible after sanding. Arthur had advised waiting until the chimney was repaired and the upper rooms could be heated reliably. "Cold settles below," he said, "so does bad air." Rebecca opened the hatch at noon. A draft rose carrying the smell of stone, earth, dry roots, and something metallic. She held a candle near the opening. The flame bent but did not extinguish. 7 granite steps descended. They were narrow, each worn at the center, and slick with dust rather than moisture. Rebecca swept them from the top downward before carrying the lantern below. The cellar measured 12 by 15 feet. Its walls were fieldstone laid in lime mortar. The floor was packed gravel except for a central area paved with broad, flat stones. Chestnut shelves lined the eastern wall. On them stood empty preserve jars, 2 stoneware crocks, a wooden cider press screw, and a box of rusted zinc lids. A drain channel ran along the northern wall and disappeared through an opening near the creekside. It remained clear. The air was cold but dry. Rebecca inspected the joists above. Several bore Roman numerals cut at the joints, marks left by the carpenter who had fitted them before assembly. Bark remained along one edge of the largest beam. At the center of the floor lay a single dressed granite slab. It measured roughly 3 feet by 4 and sat slightly higher than the surrounding stones. Its edges were square. On its surface was carved the same craft mark found on the cedar disc, a key crossing an open doorway. Rebecca brushed dust from the symbol. She tested the slab with the heel of her hand. Solid. She tapped each corner with the wooden handle of Walter's hammer. 3 produced a low, settled sound. The 4th seemed faintly hollow, though the difference might have come from the gravel beneath. The slab had iron lifting points set into 2 edges. Rebecca did not use them. Nothing in the letter had mentioned the stone. Arthur had not mentioned it either. The cottage had already taught her that a sealed thing did not become urgent merely because she had found it. She recorded the dimensions and left it undisturbed. On the way upstairs, the lantern cast a narrow shadow beneath the 3rd granite step. Something had been wedged behind its riser. Rebecca set down the lantern and reached into the gap. Her fingers touched wood. The object resisted at first. She removed dust with a narrow brush, then drew out a small oak box no longer than her hand. Its corners were joined with fine dovetails. A brass hook held the lid closed. The box contained a key and a photograph. The key was brass, much smaller than the iron door key, but heavier than its size suggested. Its bow had been shaped into the bellweather symbol, an open doorway crossed by a key. The bit was narrow and cut with 5 irregular steps. No lock in the cottage matched it. Beneath the key lay a tintype photograph wrapped in cotton. A young woman stood before the Bellweather cottage. She appeared no older than 25. Her dress was dark, with sleeves fitted closely at the wrist. A leather apron covered the skirt. In her right hand she held a brass-faced hammer. Her hair was parted at the center and drawn back plainly. Her face made Rebecca sit on the stair. The resemblance was not exact. The woman's mouth was fuller. Her eyes were set slightly wider apart, yet the line of the nose, the angle of the jaw, and the guarded way she held her shoulders belonged to a face Rebecca had seen in mirrors all her life. Behind the woman, the cottage roof was intact. The walnut trees were younger. A second workshop stood where only the collapsed foundation remained. Rebecca turned the photograph over. The writing had faded but remained legible. Abigail Bell, daughter of Elias, age 25, summer of 1887. The date did not match the style of the newer photograph paper. It was a tintype mounted within a thin card sleeve, likely copied or labeled later. The inscription had been written by Rose, Abigail, the daughter who had learned enough to assist at the bench and had been told the trade was unsuitable for her. Rebecca carried the box upstairs. She placed the tintype beside Rose's letter and compared the face to Samuel's photograph. The resemblance passed through him, too, softened by age and a man's broader brow. The brass key went on the mantel. For several days, Rebecca tested nothing. She did not carry it from cupboard to cupboard. She did not search behind every plate or pry at the cellar slab. The key remained beneath the lantern, gathering light along its worn bow. Its lock could wait. Spring did not arrive in a single day. It began beneath the snow. During the first week of March, the creek grew louder, though its surface remained mostly frozen. Water moved under the ice with greater weight, striking stones hard enough to be heard from the porch at night. By March 18th, the southern slope of the clearing showed dark grass. Snow retreated from the foundation in uneven bands. The cottage emerged carrying the stains of winter: lime dust near the chimney, cedar shavings beneath the eave, saw marks on the beach rounds, and blue chalk still caught within one roof seam. The walnut trees released catkins in early April. They hung from the branches like narrow green cords, trembling whenever wind came down from the notch. Chickadees searched the bark. A red squirrel claimed the western tree and scolded Rebecca whenever she approached Elias's marker. The well pump moved on April 6th. Rebecca had applied penetrating oil through February, wrapped the head in dark cloth during sunny afternoons, and worked the handle no more than an inch at a time. When it finally rose, rust flaked from the pivot and fell onto the platform. She lowered it, raised it again. On the 9th stroke, water coughed from the spout, brown at first, then clearer. Rebecca filled 3 buckets and discarded them. She took a sealed sample to the county office and paid for bacterial and mineral testing from the remaining cash. The results arrived 12 days later. Safe after flushing, though high in iron. Evelyn Harrow read the report across the clerk's counter. "You have water." "Yes, ma'am." Evelyn looked over her spectacles. "You may stop saying that." Rebecca folded the report. "I may." The demolition hearing took place on April 15th. Gideon submitted a written statement concerning the roof and chimney. Walter provided receipts for materials. Arthur brought photographs showing the repairs in sequence. Evelyn placed the county inspection file beside them. The building officer walked through every room. He examined the sister rafters, window cords, hearth clearances, foundation stones, plaster patches, and well report. He tested the front steps with his full weight. At the workbench, he noticed the 47 tagged keys. He asked no question about them. The demolition order was suspended for 1 year, subject to a second inspection. Occupancy remained technically restricted until a smoke detector, fire extinguisher, and approved privy repair were completed. Walter added all 3 to the account. Rebecca signed. That afternoon, she sat beneath the walnut trees with Rose's technical instructions in her lap. The brass blanks waited in the workroom. The files had been cleaned. The forge foundation remained beneath brambles, though enough equipment existed for cold fitting, repair, and simple keywork. She could begin. She did not. The winter had taught her the difference between urgency and readiness. She would order a small quantity of brass with 1 coin from the cache. She would practice on samples without names attached. She would learn the locks already in the cottage before accepting one that protected another person's door. 1 coin. No more. The remainder would stay sealed. Rebecca closed the letter and looked toward the repaired northern roof. New cedar shone pale against the weathered courses. In time, sun and rain would darken it. The distinction would soften without disappearing. The house had been patient. So was she. 2 winters later, on December 7th, 2024, Rebecca completed her first bellwether lock. Snow fell beyond the workroom window in the same fine level threads that had crossed the library glass when she first read the county notice. The eastern sash from 1788 held the cold outside. Its green-edged pane bent the white clearing into gentle waves. The lock rested on the maple bench. It was a small rim lock for a pantry door at Doris's Cafe. The original case had survived, but the spring was broken and the key lost. Rebecca had cleaned the iron in diluted vinegar for 90 minutes, rinsed it, warmed it beside mild heat, and oiled it at once. She shaped a new spring from thin steel, coating it with lampblack and tallow before tempering it to deep gold. The key was brass. She annealed the blank under low light until the metal reached a dull red, then let it cool in still air. She blackened the bit over a lamp flame and fitted it by soot marks. 3 strokes. Test. 3 more. Test again. Near midnight, the key turned through the repaired lock and carried the bolt fully home. Rebecca withdrew it, wiped away the soot, and applied the beeswax polish Rose had described. 4 parts beeswax, 1 part boiled linseed oil. 12 minutes of stirring after melting. The finished brass held no bright shine. It carried a warm, settled luster, honest enough to show the file marks if held near the lamp. Rebecca stamped the inside of the case with the bellwether symbol. Below it, she added her initials, R.H. The cottage around her had changed without losing its proportions. The front room held the restored maple table, 4 ladder-back chairs repaired with new rush, and the cast-iron stove now set upon a proper hearth pad. The wool rug lay flat across the honey-dark floor. Shelves held jars of beans, oats, rice, dried apples, coffee, and the preserves Doris traded each autumn. The roof no longer leaked. The windows lifted on balanced cords. Lime-washed walls reflected lantern light without hiding their patched places. In the back room, the rope bed had been restrung. The cedar chest held Rose's letter, the photographs, and Rebecca's growing set of repair records. Samuel's walnut-handled file remained on the workbench, used sparingly and never lent. No room had become grand. The cottage remained compact, plain, and exact. On the mantel, the small brass key still waited. Rebecca had carried it for 2 years without finding its lock. The answer came during the first hard freeze of that December. A storm split a dead limb from the center walnut. It fell westward without striking the cottage, tearing away a strip of bark where the horseshoe had entered the trunk generations earlier. Beneath the torn bark was a brass plate. It had been set into a hollow and covered by a thin fitted panel of wood that the tree had slowly enclosed. Only the storm's break exposed its lower edge. Rebecca climbed a ladder the next morning. The plate was green with age and shaped like an arched doorway. At its center waited a narrow keyway. She returned to the mantel. The brass key entered without resistance. The lock turned 1/4 circle. Behind the plate, a cedar-lined cavity extended into the old trunk. It was dry. Within it lay a folded cloth bundle wrapped in oiled canvas and a narrow envelope sealed with red wax. Rebecca carried both inside before opening them. The cloth was a 48-star United States flag. Its blue field had faded unevenly. Several stripes were mended by hand with tiny stitches. When unfolded across the table, it measured no more than 3 feet along its longest edge. The envelope bore Rose's handwriting. The date was November 11th, 1918. My dear keeper, today the bells rang for the end of the war in Europe. I will not live to hear them, but I have asked this note to be placed with the flag when that day comes. Reverend Asa Boyd has agreed to do it, and I trust him to keep both dry. The flag belonged first to Elias. Abigail stitched the stars after New Mexico and Arizona entered the Union. She kept it folded in the walnut because she believed a flag should rest in living wood rather than a locked chest. If you have found it, the tree has opened by weather or age. Do not repair the hiding place. Some promises are kept by allowing them to be found. The note ended there. No signature was necessary, though Rose had added her name. Rebecca read it beside the flag while the damaged walnut branch lay outside across the snow. She did not replace the plate. The hollow had completed its work. Arthur came that afternoon. He stood beside the table with both hands resting on his cane, looking at the faded stars. "I did not know," he said. "Did Samuel? Perhaps. Did he tell you anything about the key? Only that the tree would decide." Arthur touched one mended stripe with the back of his finger. "My brother's name was on a wall in Washington." Rebecca waited. Arthur had never mentioned a brother. "He died in Vietnam," he said, 1968. The flag on the table predated that loss by half a century. Yet Arthur looked at it as though grief could recognize its own country across time. They refolded it together. First lengthwise, then again. Not into a ceremonial triangle, but along the original creases Abigail's hands had left. On July 3rd of the following year, Rebecca carried Elias Bell's medal to Lakeview Cemetery in Burlington. The date marked the anniversary of the fighting at Gettysburg, recorded on its reverse. Arthur came with her. So did Reverend Boyd, though his morning walks had grown shorter, and he now used 2 canes on uneven ground. They found Elias's name on a family stone near a maple at the eastern edge of the cemetery. The marker gave only his birth, death, regiment, and the words "returned home." Rebecca placed the medal on the grass before it. They remained for 1 hour. No speech was made. At the end, Rebecca wrapped the medal again and carried it back to Bellweather. Rose had asked that it rest there for an hour, not that it be surrendered. The cash remained nearly whole. Rebecca spent one $10 gold coin to purchase brass stock, spring steel, a jeweler's saw, and 2 finer files. A Morgan dollar paid the county well testing fee and part of the privy work after Walter found a collector willing to exchange its value fairly. 2 worn half-dollars bought lamp oil, wick, and the first box of blank repair tags. A 5th coin, an Indian head cent with a hole near its rim, was not spent. Rebecca tied it to the account book with blue thread. The rest of the money returned to the tin box. She added modern paper currency equal to the exact face value she had used, though it carried none of the cash's history. Beside it, she placed an inventory of every coin, note, date, and purpose. At the bottom, she wrote, "For the next one. Use what preserves the promise. Leave enough that choice remains possible." She resealed the box with wax and returned it to the cedar compartment behind the workbench drawer. The military medal stayed in the cedar chest. The flag rested above it. Bellweather lock and latch reopened without a sign. Doris placed an index card on the corkboard inside the cafe. Lock repair old keys-fitted cabinet, trunk, and interior door. Work inquire at Bellweather Road. No telephone number, no prices. The first customer was a widow from Warren who brought a cedar jewelry box sealed since her husband's death. Rebecca opened it without damaging the lock. Inside were fishing licenses, cufflinks, and 19 letters tied with green ribbon. The second customer brought a church cupboard key worn too thin to lift the lever. The third brought nothing but a photograph of a railway trunk and asked whether Rebecca could travel to inspect it. She said no. Winter roads still deserved respect. By spring, a mailing list had formed. Doris kept names on index cards in a recipe box beneath the cafe counter. There were 43 by April. Most requested repairs that could wait. Rebecca accepted only 6 at a time. She did not advertise beyond the corkboard. No newspaper wrote about the shop. No television crew climbed the former settlement road. The work traveled by quieter means. A pantry lock turned cleanly. A desk opened. A family Bible came out of a trunk. A schoolhouse retained its original latch instead of replacing it with bright packaged hardware. Payment arrived as checks, cash, maple syrup, eggs, split wood, and once a hand-knitted sweater with sleeves too long. Rebecca kept accounts. Doris received candles. They were beeswax rolled by hand during evenings when the workbench required rest. Rebecca brought 12 to the cafe in a paper sack. Doris counted them. "This is too many. You charged interest. I did not. You would have." Doris placed 2 candles on every table during the first snowfall. Caleb returned to Bellweather at 19. The Schwinn had been replaced by a rusted pickup, though the blue bicycle lay in the truck bed beneath a tarp. He had grown broader through the shoulders. His coat fit. He was apprenticing with a Finnish carpenter in Montpelier and came home on weekends when work allowed. He carried a wooden sign wrapped in an army blanket. "I made something," he said. Rebecca cleared the table. The sign was carved from a single board of white oak. Its upper line followed the lettering above the cottage door. Bellweather Lock and Latch. Below it, in smaller letters, Caleb had cut, "and daughters." Rebecca read the words twice. "Plural," she said. "Yes, there is only one woman working here." Caleb leaned against the table. "That is not what it means." "What does it mean?" He looked toward Abigail's tintype on the shelf. "Her, Rose, you, whoever comes next." The carving was careful but not flawless. One curve in the ampersand ran deeper than the other. The final S tilted slightly uphill. Rebecca touched the letters. "Your spacing changed." "I know. Did you measure from center?" "After the first line." She looked at him. Caleb smiled without showing teeth. 3 strokes, then test. They hung the sign inside the workroom rather than above the cottage entrance. The old Way House sign remained outside. For those between roads. It had earned its place. The new sign belonged near the bench, where sawdust and brass filings would gather along its lower edge. Arthur saw it several weeks later. He removed his hat. "About time," he said. "For what?" "For the grammar to catch up." By the winter of 2026, Rebecca had begun her own letter. She used cream paper from the stationery drawer in Evelyn Harrow's office and a fountain pen Walter found in the back of a locked display case. The first attempt sounded like instructions written for a stranger. She tore it once. The second attempt explained too much. She kept it, but began again. On the third evening, snow pressed softly against the eastern window while the cottage settled around the stove. Rebecca placed Samuel's file above the page. She wrote, "My dear one, whoever you are." Then she stopped. A future keeper did not need the whole house delivered in one sitting. That person would have to learn the floor's creaks, the creak's winter channel, the difference between a proud nail and a sound one, the way the well pump moved only after patience had outlasted force. Rebecca described the roof repair. She recorded Walter's account, Doris's candles, Gideon's 3-stroke nail, Marion's dry barn stall, June Patel's gloves, and Arthur's warning that pride spent heat quickly. She included the test results for the well and the ratios for lime plaster. She explained that the central granite slab in the cellar had not been lifted. It remained there. The carved mark at its center had grown smoother beneath dusting and time. Rebecca did not know whether it covered a drain, a grave, another compartment, or only the foundation stone chosen by Josiah Bell. Not every mystery required an owner. She wrote that too. Near the end, Rebecca added, "The cash is not a fortune. It is time made portable." Spend it only when time is what the house requires. She folded the unfinished pages and placed them in the cedar chest beside Rose's letter. There would be more years to complete them. Perhaps many. Perhaps not. The cottage had already survived the uncertainty of every person who had kept it. In late December, another snowstorm crossed Granville Notch. Wind covered the road beyond the lower bridge and erased Caleb's truck tracks within an hour. Rebecca brought in wood, filled the water pail, checked the roof hatch, and lowered every sash. At dusk, someone knocked. 3 careful strikes. Rebecca opened the door. A girl stood on the porch. She was perhaps 19, though hunger and cold had made age difficult to judge. Her coat had torn beneath one sleeve. Snow clung to her hair. A cloth bag hung from one shoulder, tied closed with electrical cord. Behind her, no vehicle waited. No one stood beneath the walnut trees. The girl looked past Rebecca into the warm front room, then lowered her eyes. I was told this house might let me stay. Rebecca did not ask who had told her. She stepped aside. Come in. The girl entered cautiously, leaving wet prints along the threshold. Rebecca closed the door against the wind and took a blanket from the peg near the stove. There was soup. There was bread. Coffee waited in the jar. The bed in the back room had clean linen, though Rebecca did not mention it until the girl had eaten. That night, Rebecca placed a second key on the table. Walter had forged the blank. Rebecca had filed the bit. Caleb had carved the wooden tag attached to its ring. The tag bore no name. Only the doorway symbol. The next morning, the girl woke to the smell of oats and wood smoke. She sat at the table with both hands around an enamel cup. Rebecca pushed the key toward her. This does not mean you own the house. The girl looked at it. What does it mean that you can return? She did not touch the key immediately. Rebecca understood. A gift could feel like another demand when a person had been made to repay every kindness with obedience. So she left it on the table and went outside to clear the porch. When she returned, the key was gone. Years later, the girl would come back with 2 children and a box of repaired blankets. She would not remain permanently. That had never been required. She would carry firewood inside, wash the cups, and place coffee in the jar before leaving. The second key would remain on her ring. Rebecca's own letter grew longer. The mailing list reached 51, then fell to 46 when she refused work that belonged to a modern locksmith with safer equipment. Doris retired but continued baking bread on Tuesdays. Caleb married no one in the telling of this story and needed no romance to explain why he kept returning with wood, signs, and better joinery. Arthur Bell died in his sleep at 91. His cane remained beside the front pew during the memorial service. At Bellweather, Rebecca placed his 1961 photograph near the lamp for 1 full winter. She did not make the cottage into a shrine. Arthur had used the rooms. He would have objected to becoming another reason no one could move a chair. In spring, Rebecca returned his photograph to the oilcloth parcel and wrote his death date beneath the note about learning to sleep through wind. Reverend Boyd's morning prayer changed after Arthur was gone. Keep all who wander. 4 words. The house continued. It received a woman whose car had failed during an ice storm, a veteran who could not bear the noise of the town shelter, 2 sisters between leases, a nurse who needed 3 nights away from a household full of grief, and a man who repaired the privy door before disappearing without giving his surname. No one was asked to explain more than safety required. No one was promised permanence. The promise was smaller and therefore more reliable. A dry room, a hot meal, a key that turned. Rebecca never learned who first sent the girl to the porch, just as she never knew who had placed the eggs in the hay barn during her own first week. The line of kindness did not reveal every hand. It did not need to. On clear mornings, light entered the 1788 glass and moved across the workbench until it reached the sign Caleb had carved: Bellweather Lock-and-Latch and Daughters. Below it, the tools waited in ordered rows. The file teeth remained clean. The brass blanks lay wrapped in waxed paper. Samuel's green lamp, recovered years after the auction from a collector in Albany who accepted a repaired trunk lock in exchange, stood at the left corner of the bench. Rebecca lit it only for fine work. Its shade cast a patient circle over her hands. The recurring winter chores became ordinary. Mortar required inspection. Sash cords stretched. Cedar shingles darkened. The well iron stained every white basin. Mice continued believing the cupboard belonged partly to them. The house was not healed once. It was kept. Near the close of each year, Rebecca opened the account book and read the earliest pages. Bread, beans, coffee, lamp oil, gloves, a sled with no inventory number. She added new entries beneath them. Blankets washed, second key keeper, carried forward. Privy sill repaired, unknown traveler, carried forward. Coffee, 2 pounds, Doris Vale, refused payment. Oak sign, Caleb Pike, payment disputed. Prayer, Reverend Boyd, not measurable. The book became thick. No final balance appeared. One November evening, Rebecca opened the county deed envelope and found the folded dollar missing. She searched the cedar chest, desk, and tin box before remembering that the original had never been given to her. Evelyn had sealed it with the permanent record on the day of transfer. The following week, Rebecca visited the county office. Evelyn had retired, but her nameplate remained in a drawer beneath the counter. The new clerk, a patient man named Lewis Grant, located the Bellweather file in the bound archive. Inside was the narrow envelope. The dollar remained folded once. Its paper had softened along the crease. Across the front, Evelyn had written the parcel number and the date Rebecca entered the office, carrying the emergency flag. Lewis allowed her to hold it while wearing cotton gloves. Rebecca did not ask to remove it from the record. The money had purchased nothing by itself. It had marked the moment the county stopped calling the cottage unwanted. Before returning the envelope, she noticed a second line in Evelyn's handwriting along the back. $1 received. Promise transferred in good order. Rebecca read it and smiled. The clerk asked whether she wanted a copy. Yes, she said. Not yes, ma'am. Evelyn had been correct. She had finally stopped. That copy went into the cedar chest with the letters. The original dollar remained in the county desk drawer, held between paper, law, and the brass impression of a seal. Snow would continue closing the upper road. Branches would fall. Mortar would powder. People would arrive with no language ready for what had happened to them. The cottage would not solve their lives. It would give them a night in which no solution was demanded. Sometimes that was the beginning of everything. One evening, long after the girl with the second key had gone, Rebecca stood beneath the porch sign and watched snow gather over the old road. The center walnut carried a scar where the brass plate had been removed. Elias's marker rested below it, its lettering untouched except by weather and the brush. Inside, the kettle began to sound. A lamp waited on the table. The unfinished letter waited in the cedar chest. Rebecca opened the door before returning to the warmth, not because anyone had knocked, but because the latch required oil, and she had learned to attend to small resistance before winter made it larger. The key turned easily afterward. The house had been waiting. Bellweather Way House waits. It has always waited.